Chapter 542. A few days later, Kane Yang came into the small courtyard with a pile of books in her arms. There were old scripts and notes in these books, as well as new sheets of paper, which should be the results of the analysis done by the elders of the Mirror sect. Jing Jiao didn't take these books with him. He looked through them in the small courtyard and picked out the ones worth remembering. Yin Jinlu was indeed an abandoned disciple of the Mirror sect. He must have had a complicated story with the Mirror sect, but that wasn't what Jing Jiao was concerned about. All he wanted to know was whether Yin Jinlu's theory of the mirror flower and the method of splitting mirrors were the same as the one in the booklet of Shuriwa Peak. After 4 hours of calculation, Jing Jiao came to the conclusion that the method of splitting mirrors wouldn't be the same as it was now if Yin Jinlu had followed the original path. Someone had done something to the seemingly inconspicuous 7th level of splitting mirrors and adjusted the sequence, which led to a hidden problem in the formation of dispersed smoke and clouds that no one could discover. The thin booklet of Shuriwa Peak was brought to the Green Mountain 734 years ago, and his big brother started thinking about the formation of the dispersed smoke and cloud 733 years ago. The time between the two was too close, so there could only be one conclusion. That booklet was brought to Shuriwa Peak by his big brother, and it was he who had done something to the method of splitting mirrors. But why did he do that? Jing Jiao looked at the winter plum blossoms outside the window, remaining silent. Zhao Liu had seldom seen Jing Jiao look so lonely, and Kane Yang was even more nervous. Jing Jiao didn't know whether he should feel happy or disappointed at the moment, but he thought that his big brother didn't tell him anything in the end, so he should be angry. Now that the formation of dispersed smoke and clouds had a problem, it had to be repaired, but he wasn't sure if it would work. That predecessor named Yin Jinlu had merely suggested it, but hadn't tried it yet. If it didn't work, he would have to find another way to ascend. Jing Jiao thought to himself while looking at his right hand. Before they left the Mirror sect, Kane Yang kowtowed to Jing Jiao earnestly. Jing Jiao allowed her to visit him in Aoyama whenever she wanted. As for playing chess, he had already thought it through. He would take her to the Hermit Peaks to find Tong Yin. Zhao Liu didn't understand. They clearly didn't have any interactions, so why did he trust this female disciple of the Mirror sect so much? Jing Jiao didn't know how to explain it. In fact, it was related to the saying, judging a person through chess. But if he said so, wouldn't it be equivalent to supporting Tong Yan's view? By the time they returned to the Shima Peak, the plum meeting in Jiaoga City had also ended. A few days later, Guangzhou Jinren came to report what had happened. Jing Jiao realized why Kane Yang was so worried. The cooperation between the major orthodox cultivation sects and the Jing imperial court involved the complicated distribution of cultivation resources. At each plum meeting, the distribution of resources would be adjusted according to the contribution and status of each cultivation sect. The difference in power between the Western Sea Sword School and the No Mercy sect had led to an obvious change in the distribution of resources. The Aoyama sect and the Zhongzhou school had always sat at the highest spot in the plum garden, so the cultivation resources of Chaotian had to be provided to them first. As such, they didn't have to worry about the reduction of resources. A shocking event had taken place at this year's plum meeting. The Zhongzhou school requested to reduce the cultivation resources of the Aoyama sect. The reason given by the Zhongzhou school sounded reasonable. All the cultivation sects had paid a great price to suppress the passage to the underworld. The Aoyama sect had been responsible for hunting down the devil men of the underworld who were scattered in various places. Now that the underworld was so well-behaved that one couldn't even find a few resentful souls in all of Chaotian, the Aoyama sect had nothing else to do, so why did they want to occupy so many resources? Moreover, the reduction of resources requested by the Zhongzhou school for the Aoyama sect was very small, so small that even the regular cultivation sects wouldn't care about it. Yet, the reduction of resources was still a reduction of resources. Everybody knew that the Zhongzhou school would take another step forward if the reduction was made. Of course, the Aoyama sect wouldn't agree to it. Guangyin Jinren and elder Yu Qianmin of the Zhongzhou school had a heated argument at the Net Perception Temple, and they almost fought each other. It was at that time that the young Zen master said something that prevented the situation from worsening. At the time, Zen master said to Yu Qianmin, "You can't defeat Guang Yuanjinren. What's the use of speaking so loudly?" Guang Yuanjinren didn't laugh when he said this. Neither did Jing Jiu, nor did Zhao Leiyu. As Ping Yongka laughed once, he was slapped back by Yuan Xianu. Zen master wouldn't help the Aoyama sect now. His words had a deeper meaning, and they might even be directed at the Aoyama sect. Yu Qianmin was indeed no match for Guang Yuanjinren. Among the 12 valley lords of the Cloud Dream Mountain, there shouldn't be anyone who could be a match for Guang Yuanjinren. The problem was that Guang Yuanjinren couldn't possibly be a match for the Immortals Tan and Bai either. The Zhongzhou school had 2 heavenly arrival masters and a unicorn, while the Aoyama sect had 1 heavenly arrival master and the cat and the dog. No matter how one looked at it, the former seemed to be stronger. Moreover, who knew what kind of old guys were hiding in the back valley of the Cloud Dream Mountain? What's the conclusion? Jingjiu asked after a moment of silence. Guang Yuanjinren said, "We'll talk about it in the Guocheng Temple in autumn. Bai Jinren will go there in person. We might have to ask the Sword Justice for help." There was still some time before autumn. He was very familiar with the Guocheng Temple. "I'll go," said Jingjiu. Guang Yuanjinren was taken aback, wondering if Jingjiu could do it. After Guang Yuanjinren left, Jingjiu shot a glance at Yuan Chu. Earlier, when Ping Yongka laughed, he was slapped by Yuan Chu. Jingjiu was a bit surprised when he saw it. According to his previous temperament, Yuan Chu would have laughed foolishly at Ping Yongka. It was unclear what he had experienced in Zhaoga City this time, but he had become smarter and more mature. "Duke Lu came to me when I was in Zhaoga City," Yuan Chu said. He said that the imperial court had been a bit restless this year, and those officials who supported Jing Xin had surfaced again. Jingjiu thought that he should have killed Jing Xin right from the beginning, because it would be troublesome in the future. "How about you?" he asked Yuan Chu. Yuan Chu knew that the sect master was asking about the cultivation tournament at the plum meeting. "This disciple is useless," he said in a low voice after hesitating for a while. "I only won the 2nd place." Jingjiu was indeed dissatisfied, asking, "Who won the 1st place?" Yuan Chu said with his head lowered, "It was big brother Lu Shui. He represented Yamatsai." Jingjiu thought he lost to Lu Shui, so he didn't say anything more. Lu Shui had a very happy year. It could even be said that this was the happiest year he had had since he joined Liangwang Peak. Yamatsai was a good fit for him. Shi Yun and other big brothers were all gentlemen, and the house master thought highly of him, teaching him reading and cultivation diligently, and letting him represent Yamatsai to participate in the plum meeting. The happiest thing was that his young master had become the sect master of Aoyama. Like what Jingjiu had experienced before, the smile on his face had never disappeared while he was making the bamboo chair. "My young master won the 1st place in the cultivation tournament back then. Of course, his opponent was much stronger than me this time, and the Snowy Kingdom was in trouble. I don't want to compete with my young master." Lu Shui's dark face was full of delight. Then he noticed that Xiao He's smile was a bit forced, and her eyes were evasive. He stopped smiling and asked seriously, "What happened?" Xiao He said in a trembling voice, "During the spring rain last year, Taiping Jinren came here." "Taiping Jinren?" asked Lu Shui with his eyes slightly frozen. Xiao He said with her head lowered, "I can't forget his face. He was the monk in the Guocheng Temple." "Didn't you say he was Taiping Jinren? Why didn't you tell me at the time?" asked Lu Shui. Xiao He rubbed her eyes and said, "I was too scared. I wanted to tell you later, but you studied too hard, and I was afraid that you would blame me." Lu Shui thought that even if she was scared at the time, why didn't she tell him later? How could he blame her? What did he come to the 1,000-mile wind corridor for? Xiao He said in a low voice. He didn't do anything. All he did was pick some lotus flowers and take them away. Lu Shui remained silent for a long time before asking, "What about you? What did you do?" He had lived with Xiao He for so many years that he knew her very well. He knew that if she hadn't done something that she didn't dare to tell him, she wouldn't be like this. I didn't do anything. All I did was show him the way." Xiao He raised her head and looked at his expressionless face. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she said in a trembling voice, "I was really scared. He wanted me to take them to the Jiao Lake. How could I dare to refuse?" "Are you talking about the Jiao Lake behind the temple?" asked Lu Shui. Xiaoyi nodded with a pale face. To make it easier for her to go to the temple to see him, Lu Shui gave her a token from the temple. She could only pass through the windy corridor with that token. Lu Shui remained silent. "Are you going to tell the temple?" Xiaoyi asked while crying. "No, I won't," said Lu Shui while shaking his head. With tears in her eyes, Xiaoyi stared at him in disbelief. Lu Shui stood up and walked toward the desk, saying, "The house master knows that I gave you the token, but if he knows that you have taken Taiping Jinren to the Jiao Lake, you will die." Looking at his back, Xiaoyi revealed a sad expression, saying, "You've changed. If it's because of me, I'm very sorry." Lu Shui sat down in front of the desk and took out a piece of ink from his sleeve. The ink was painted with gold, and there were also gold threads mixed in it. The ink slid noiselessly on the ink stone, gradually turning into a golden black liquid. It was hard to describe with words. It was just like his entire life. He used to be a carefree child in a mountain village. Later, he became a chivalrous disciple of Liangwang Peak. Then, he spent a long period of time in Bulolin. He knew what kind of person he wanted to be, but he didn't know what kind of person he was at the moment. Having finished grinding the special gold ink, he took out a writing brush, dipped it in the ink, and began to write a letter. This seemingly ordinary writing brush was the Guard City pen, the most precious treasure of the temple in Yamatai. Back when the scholar Yin gave the Guard City pen to him, he had always kept it with him. It was only because his cultivation state was not high enough that he couldn't use it. Now he had studied in Yamatai for many years. After the cultivation tournament of the Plum meeting, his cultivation state had improved again, and the Guard City pen had finally accepted him as its master. Xiaoyi wiped off her tears and walked to his back. "Who are you writing to?" she asked uneasily. "Young master," replied Lu Shui. He couldn't tell the house master about this, but he couldn't hide it from his young master. End of this chapter. Chapter 543. Yesterday, Guang Yuanzhen mentioned the meeting in the Guocheng Temple, and Jingjiu thought he was familiar with it, so he went there. I deleted those 2 sentences when I edited the chapter. In this chapter, I asked Jingjiu to go to the Guocheng Temple because of Insan's lotus, but I forgot to edit it in the draft box, so I deleted it today. It's just a minor detail, but it's important. I'd like to report it to you. Having finished writing the letter, Lu Shui threw it out of the window without folding it or putting it in an envelope. The letter rose up with the wind, as if it had 2 wings, and flew toward the southwest at a high speed. The amulet of Yamatai was attached to the letter. If someone intercepted the letter on the way, the letter would be destroyed as soon as possible, and the amulet in the letter would attack the other party. Only the owner of the amulet could read the letter. It was easy for Lu Shui to find the aura of Jingjiu, like the jasmine flower and the lone sword. A few days later, the letter arrived outside the Aoyama, but it couldn't pass through the great formation of Aoyama. Yuan Qijing walked to the outside of the manor cave and looked at the sky expressionlessly. He saw the letter. He should be able to see the content of the letter easily given his eyesight, but he could only see a few blurry ink balls, either because of the magic power of the Guard City pen or the amulet. It was for this reason that he knew this was a letter from Yamatai, which opened a passage for the great formation of Aoyama. The letter passed through the passage and drifted toward the Shinma Peak. Yuan Qijing's line of sight fell on the Shinma Peak along with the letter. Recalling the conversation between Jingjiu and Bu Qiuxiao in Jiaoga City, he suddenly realized that it wasn't a bad idea for Jingjiu to be the sect master. Nobody knew the actual content of the conversation until now. All they knew was that Yamatai didn't support Prince Jing Xian anymore after that day. Seeing the letter drifting to the bamboo chair, Jingjiu took it down and threw it back into the air after reading it. The letter ignited without any fire and instantly turned into ashes, scattering into the deep grass at the bottom of the cliff. Zhao Leu turned her head and asked, "What did Shui say in the letter?" Jing Jiao picked up the wooden comb and continued. That man went to Yamatai to get some lotus flowers. Zhao Liu asked, Is there a problem? Jing Jiao said, I'm not sure, but I have a bad feeling. Zhao Liu took the comb and said, Then hold on tight. Jing Jiao got up and went to the cave residence to write a list. He handed it to Gu Qing and the other two who were called out by Zhao Liu and said, Prepare all these things in one day. Ping Yongka had no idea what those things were, so he answered honestly. Gu Qing could only recognize two of them as rare magic materials, so he thought the rest of the dozens of items should be treasures of the same level. I'm afraid they can't be found on the 9 peaks, he said. Yuan Chu came from a learned family, so he knew more treasures than Jing Jiao. He shook his head and said, To say nothing of the 9 peaks, some of them are hard to find even in the whole of Chaotian. After the 3 of them had memorized the names, Jing Jiao crushed the paper into powder and burned it with the sword fire. These things are in Tingguang Peak, Shangda Peak, and Shuriwa Peak, he continued. You guys go and get them separately. Those magic materials were indeed rare, and it took him decades to collect them. If he were to start collecting them again, he might not be able to find all of them in a few hundred years. However, he collected 4 sets of magic materials at the time, and used 1 set when he ascended. There were still 3 sets left in Aoyama. In addition to the rare materials written on the paper, more common auxiliary materials were needed, such as crystals and remania powder. Shima Peak began to receive the materials. It was rare for the monkeys to have a specific task, so they carried the materials up and down the peak while yelling loudly. It was quite a bustling scene. Yuan Qijing learned of the activity on the other side, so he could easily find out the types and quantities of those auxiliary materials. He was baffled, wondering why Jing Jiao had started setting up the formation now. Wasn't it too early for him to ascend? Dozens of rare magic materials and the rest of the materials were brought into the manor cave on the top of Shinma Peak. The stone door was tightly shut, and no sound could be heard coming out from inside. Nobody knew what Jing Jiao was doing inside. Time passed slowly, and soon it was summer. The floating ice was everywhere on the vast ocean, and a godly boat was traveling forward while breaking through the ice waves. Crouching on the top of the sail, the dark phoenix looked at the incoming waves and the endless ice chunks in the distance, his expression exceedingly solemn. He didn't look any different than before, but if one looked closely, they would find that one of his tail feathers was missing, and the color of the feathers on his body was much lighter. The godly boat traveled northward. The weather grew colder and colder, and the ice and frost on the dark phoenix grew thicker and thicker, but he had no intention of coming down. He was still standing in the knife-like cold wind. He was wounded twice by Nanchu in the Battle of the West Ocean, and he had lost his cultivation of 1,000 years. He was at his weakest moment, but he grew even more arrogant because of this. The cultivation of any living being was to fight against heaven. Pain was the price they had to pay, but it was also the best source of spiritual energy. Along with a few thudding sounds, the speed of the godly boat dropped abruptly. It seemed that the boat had bumped into an iceberg at the bottom of the ocean. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect walked out from the cabin and checked the crystal stove that provided the energy for the godly boat. After making sure there was nothing wrong with it, he came to the bow of the boat and looked at the endless floating ice ahead. After a moment of silence, he said, I don't think anybody can chase us all the way here. The dark phoenix looked down at the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect, his eyes full of disdain, as he thought that he was truly a deviant and cowardly cultivator. They went to the Penglai Island a year ago and robbed this special godly boat from the king of the godly boat at a cost of half the price. They sailed to the West Ocean and headed northward. The orthodox cultivation sects in Chaotian had been searching for them everywhere, but they didn't expect them to come to the North Ocean, where the chaotic wind was rampant and the cold was bone-piercing. The cold wind whistled and tousled the sparse hair of the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect into hundreds of straight strands. The scenery of the icy ocean was too monotonous, and he didn't wish to lose all his hair so early. As such, he turned around and entered the cabin. This godly boat was very large, and there were many rooms inside. A few formations were set up in the room in the deepest part of the boat, and a few instruments of different sizes were placed in the room according to the positions of the stars. Those instruments exuded all sorts of peculiar fragrances and spiritual wills. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect knew that the smallest porcelain goblet contained the bone marrow of the old dragon. The wooden lacquer round case contained the scales of the fire carp, and the armor case contained the cartilage of the flying whale. The most important phoenix feather was hidden in the longest bamboo stick of the southern concubine bamboo. Sitting in the middle of these precious treasures, San tapped the bone flute in his hand softly. He looked at the lotus flower in front of him in silence. It was unclear what he was thinking at the moment. The lotus flower was marvelous. It was neither in the vat nor in the water, as if it had come out of nowhere. It was until now that the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect still didn't know why the immortal took the risk to go to the 1,000-mile wind corridor to retrieve this lotus flower. No matter how he looked at it, this lotus flower looked like a regular lotus flower. San stopped what he was doing and put the bone flute back in his sleeve, asking, "How is it?" The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect said, "The crystal stove is not damaged, but the temperature it can provide is not high enough to meet your requirement." As Jingjio was thinking about how to ascend, San was thinking about how to achieve total transformation. He had already prepared all the necessary materials according to the records in the ancient script and his own calculations. All he needed to do now was to start tempering. No matter whether it was tempering a sword or a magic pill, a stove with a very high temperature and a pure flame was needed. The stove he needed had a much higher temperature than the regular stoves and magic pill stoves. The reason he went to Penglai Island to rob this boat was because he wanted the crystal stove designed by the king of the godly boat. But he didn't expect it to be enough. He had thought of this problem when he went to the cold mountain to rob the scales of the fire carp. But it was a pity that he didn't have any broken pieces of the sun banner left. Those broken pieces couldn't vanish with the wind, nor could they be burned to ashes by the underground fire. As such, they must be somewhere. Few things could be concealed from Bulow Lin. It's not someone from the imperial court, nor is it someone from the windy broadsword church. San continued while looking at the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect. "I think it's Suzai. I asked him to bring it here." The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect said, "That lad sold us out once. Can we still use him?" San said with a smile, "A lonely soul and a wild ghost will feel grateful to be used by someone." Before the first thunderstorm arrived, the stone door of the manor cave was opened, and Jingjio walked out. He carried Ada and went to Bihu Peak. Countless heavenly thunders struck down from the night sky and struck the top of Bihu Peak, and many of them entered Jingjio's body. Afterward, Jingjio took a bath in the Bihu Lake. The excess thunder that his body couldn't contain dispersed into the lake water. Along with a series of crackling sounds, tens of thousands of fish passed out and floated to the surface of the water, their bellies facing the sky. They looked like tens of thousands of silver coins. I salute the more vulgar one more time. Those pitiful fish didn't wake up until the next day, but some of them died, and some of them ended up in the stomachs of the seagulls. Jingjio didn't see these miserable scenes. He went to Shanghai Peak that very night. What do you want to do? The frost on Yuan Shijing's eyebrows was like the icicles on the eaves, which seemed to fall off at any moment, but would never fall off. The temperature in the manor cave of Shangda Peak was too low, so the frost formed naturally, and he had been frowning from spring to summer because of Jingjio. "There's something wrong with that formation," said Jingjio. "I want to modify it." Yuan Shijing knew what Jingjio referred to as the formation of the dispersed smoke and clouds. Asking, "Have you succeeded?" "No," replied Jingjio. "I think I need to find a new method." "It turns out that you have a problem that you can't solve," Yuan Shijing remarked expressionlessly. Jingjio didn't want to pay any attention to him, saying, "I'll go to the Guocheng Temple in autumn." Yuan Shijing arched his eyebrows, the frost on his face falling off, wondering what had happened to Jingjio. Jingjio didn't explain that it was because that person had picked a lotus flower in the 1,000-mile windy corridor. The lotus flower meant reincarnation in the Zen sections. And there was a reincarnated person in the Guocheng temple. Jingjiu walked into the well and arrived at the gloomy underground along with the sunlight. The dead dog opened his eyes and bowed to Jingjiu with his head lowered. Jingjiu flew to his front and asked while rubbing his head, "What do you think he is doing right now?" The scene looked like a cat trying to reach out his front paw in an attempt to comfort a big boy. The dead dog couldn't answer this question. Jingjiu passed through the gloomy and filthy passageway and arrived at the deep part of the sword jail, looking at the lonely cell again. The snow girl sensed his arrival and turned to look at the stone door of the cell. Their eyes met again. End of this chapter. Chapter 544. Since the snow girl came to Aoyama, Jingjiu had come to the sword jail to see her a few times. It was rare for him to see her, no matter if he was just passing by or on purpose. First of all, it showed how much he valued and respected her. Second, it was because he wanted to make sure of something. And the last and most important reason was that he wanted to have some communication with her. It was rare to find a being who had the same height and experience as Jingjiu and could communicate with him as an equal. Jingjiu chose to give up the communication for the first few times. All he did was ask her if she wanted to change her chair because he didn't want to take the risk of contacting her spiritual awareness. It was because of the lotus flower that Jingjiu wanted to have some communication with her that day. But he gave up in the end. He turned around and walked toward the other side of the passageway. The snow girl turned around and looked at the lone peak on this side. After passing through the sword jail, Jingjiu came to the hermit peaks. The blue sky was cloudless, and the starlight looked like water. It was completely different from the stormy night, as if it were an illusion. Jingjiu pulled back his gaze and flew in the air, landing in the middle of the peak. The ruby outside the manor cave was still glowing, and the sword awareness he left behind wasn't disturbed. It seemed that the dead dog hadn't come to see Fong Jingtian. Next, Jingjiu went to the manor cave of Tong Yin. Tong Yin opened his eyes and said icily when he saw Jingjiu, "Didn't you agree not to bother me for 10 years?" Jingjiu didn't heed him and walked to the front of the stone table. A go board was placed on the stone table, on which dozens of go pieces were scattered. It was the same as the one Tong Yin had placed when Jingjiu came last time. Jingjiu picked up a black go piece and put it on the bottom left corner. The situation on the go board was obviously different from before. A few white go pieces in the corner had no hope of escaping and were on the verge of being eaten. Tong Yin was aware that Jingjiu was about to strike. "Why now?" she asked in surprise. Jingjiu said, "I have something to do outside, so I'll do it on the way." Tong Yin knew what kind of person Jingjiu was, feeling even more surprised, asking, "Are you going to leave the mountains?" If it was Zhuo Ruzhui, he would definitely say, "Should I tell you that I've already gone to the mirror sect?" Jingjiu didn't say anything about this. He told Tong Yin about what had happened in Zhaoga City, and then he told her about the meeting at the Guoqing Temple in autumn. "What will Bai Jinren do?" he asked. It was the middle of summer in Chaotian. The hot and humid wind blew everywhere, making the people feel a bit gloomy and restless. In the imperial court, the officials were quarreling endlessly. Naturally, no one mentioned Jing Xian's matter. They were all arguing about some river works and military affairs, but everyone knew where the wind was blowing. Those small sects kept going to the Dream Cloud Mountain as if they were on a pilgrimage, and they also brought along a bad trend. A storm was brewing, and it was heading towards Aoyama. The entire cultivation world and the officials in the imperial court were waiting for the negotiation in the Guoqing Temple in the autumn. Everyone's attention was drawn to this matter, and no one noticed that something was happening in those remote places. For instance, after the flood in early summer in Izhou, at least 300 residents were missing, and their corpses hadn't been found yet. It was highly likely that their corpses had been washed into the hidden river under the ground. There was no light in the hidden river, and only a faint sound of water could be heard. Standing in the river, one would think of the rumored underworld, though the real underworld was not like this. Yet the hidden river had some faint, ghostly flames that night. The flames didn't come from the corpses, but from the cruel eyes. Chased by Bihu Peak of the Alchemist sect and the Pure Heaven Bureau of the Imperial Court, these remaining members of the mysterious dark sect who were summoned to Ijo City had no choice but to struggle in the hidden river under the ground. In comparison, the mutilated corpses floating in the hidden river were even more miserable. Those who had fallen into the hidden river died instantly and became the living souls for practicing the deviant magic. The sound of water could be heard up ahead. The ghostly eyes became extremely bright, full of greed. But in the next moment, the pair of eyes showed nothing but fear. The hidden river was illuminated by a sword light. The disciple of the mysterious dark sect wielded the black banner in an attempt to subdue the flying sword, but the black banner was torn apart instantly. With a sizzling sound, his head fell into the hidden river. A few grunts could be heard by the hidden river, and a dozen filthy and dark energies headed toward the flying sword like tornadoes. At the same time, a few black banners rose up in the air. The sword light vanished abruptly, and then glowed again, traveling at a high speed in the hidden river, ignoring the black banners. The sword light appeared and disappeared intermittently. A few disciples of the mysterious dark sect died after grunting. It was quiet in the hidden river, save for the sound of heads falling into the water and the flying sword killing people. The gloomy cliff walls suddenly quaked. Dozens of disciples of the mysterious dark sect broke out of the ground, fleeing toward the dark night downstream of the hidden river. No matter how powerful the intruder was, he couldn't kill all of them. They were the only survivors of the mysterious dark sect, so they had to try their best to survive. As long as they were alive, the mysterious dark sect would still exist. The dark night downstream of the hidden river was suddenly illuminated by the sword light. The sword light was a bit strange, glowing with a deep red color, like the sunset glow, or more like blood. A fierce and lonely sword was swept across the surface of the water, killing a few disciples of the mysterious dark sect in the front. The dark night was illuminated by the sword light. After a few rounds of fighting, the surviving disciples of the mysterious dark sect fled back, covered in blood, but they were blocked by the swordsman in front of them. The disciples of the mysterious dark sect glanced at each other and let out a desperate and resentful roar. They activated the scorching sun secret method of the mysterious dark sect, igniting their own spirit blood. Boom! Boom! Countless muffled explosions broke out underground. Wild waves rose up in the hidden river, but they were instantly boiled by the evil demon fire, and then turned into steam with a higher temperature, surging up and down the river. After a long time, the smoke and dust settled down, and the hidden river returned to normal. A sword light pierced through the air from downstream. Zhuo Ruzhui was covered in blood. He must have been severely wounded. He didn't expect these surviving disciples of the mysterious dark sect to use the evil method of igniting their spirit blood in the end, so he got a little closer to them. Wearing a conical hat, Zhao Leu arrived on her sword. The bright red flames and the redder sword light illuminated her sword. Among the remaining flames on the surface of the river, countless broken limbs of the disciples of the mysterious dark sect were scattered on the surface of the river, and then they sank gradually, merging with the broken corpses of those innocent civilians. It wouldn't take long for them to be eaten by the blind fish in the hidden river, and they would never be able to be separated. Ijo was most famous for its hot pot. Suzai disliked hot pot the most, because he had lived in the scorching sun gorge, a hot pot naturally formed by heaven and earth for too many years. That night, he jumped into the sky in the scorching sun gorge and fell to his death. All the people in the gorge died, including his loyal subordinates and his father. These unpleasant memories were very similar to that sword light. Every time he recalled them, he would feel as if his demonic wheel had been cut in half. It was excruciatingly painful. He took out a magic pill and swallowed it. Then he started panting heavily, an unhealthy blush appearing on his green face, which looked even more eerie. After a while, the pain in his eyes turned into intoxication. In the end, all the emotions in his eyes disappeared, leaving nothing but calmness. Like all the other deviant sects, the mysterious dark sect didn't have a spiritual source, so they would encounter problems in their cultivation, and they couldn't sustain themselves for a long time by taking medicine. Suzai left the small courtyard he rented and went to a cheap old tea house. Some people were drinking tea in the old tea house, but more people were playing mahjong. The stains on the teacups could be seen clearly. The large kettle was placed on the coal stove, and the water in the kettle was always boiling, making a whimpering sound. Suzai ordered a cup of the cheapest and most common jasmine tea and sat down in the most inconspicuous seat. Wearing a cotton shirt and a mask, he looked no different from the other customers in the tea house. Time elapsed slowly. The whimpering sound of the large kettle suddenly disappeared. The noise and profanities at the mahjong tables faded away gradually. Suzai picked up the teacup, blew away the froth, took a sip, and looked at the opposite side. Rujui said, "I heard that your face is green. Can I take a look at it?" Suzai put down the teacup and asked, "How did you find me?" He had always been secretive about his whereabouts, and he used the title of King Ming to summon those disciples who were wandering outside. Only 2 people knew about this tea house. Those 2 people were his former subordinates. They had a high cultivation state and were very loyal. They wouldn't betray him. Zhuo Rujui didn't respond to his question, asking, "Do you know who I am?" Suzai said, "In Aoyama, Zhuo Rujui is the only person who is as downcast as you, but has a sharp sword will." Zhuo Rujui praised, "You're indeed Suzai. You're quite knowledgeable." Suzai stood up and said while looking at him, "But even if you're Zhuo Rujui, you're not qualified to kill me." Zhuo Rujui said, "It said in the cultivation circle that you're more powerful than Lo Huainan, so you should be as powerful as me. It's indeed troublesome for me to kill you alone." Now that he said so, it meant that he wasn't alone. Looking at the outside of the tea house, Suzai saw Zhao Liu wearing the conical hat and the thoughtless sword emitting a blood-red glow. All the cultivation circle knew that Zhao Liu was the personal disciple of the immortal Jingyang, born with natural Tao quality and a strong murderous nature. But Suzai didn't expect her to be in the upper state of the free travel. It was the same for Zhuo Rujui in the same state. The younger generation of the Aoyama sect was exceedingly powerful. Thinking of all this, Suzai remarked, "It's not fair." He was the strongest swordsman of the younger generation of the deviant sects, and his talent in cultivation was superior to that of Lo Huainan. Even if Zhao Liu and Zhuo Rujui were very powerful, he wouldn't be afraid of them, but he would lose without a doubt if it were 2 against 1. "What?" Zhuo Rujui exclaimed. Suzai took off his mask and smiled, then took out a magic pill and put it into his mouth. The effect of the pill was very fast. His face turned red instantly, and then turned purple after mixing with the green color. His eyes were a bit unfocused, but his energy grew much stronger. Zhao Liu didn't know what it was, but Zhuo Rujui knew that it was the rumored pill poison. "You'll die if you keep taking it," he said earnestly. "But at least you 2 will die first today," Suzai said. Zhuo Rujui felt baffled, thinking that if taking pills could work, who would dare claim that they had more magic pills than those on Shirua Peak? "Do you think you can kill us by relying on the pill poison?" Suzai took out a light brown bottle. It was unclear what this bottle was made of. It looked like jade or porcelain. Zhao Liu still didn't know what it was, but Zhuo Rujui remarked sentimentally, "The barren vase is indeed in your hands." Suzai raised the barren vase and said calmly, "It's not important." A whimpering sound suddenly broke out in the tea house. It was the water in the large kettle boiling. An old man walked over with a kettle in his hand. His eyes were sunken, exuding a strong and pungent smell of blood. This old man had boiled the water in this old tea house for many years. He was still here when everybody else had left the tea house. He was Elder Hua Yin of the mysterious dark sect. He had been driven out of the scorching sun gorge by Su Chiga many years ago and had been living in Izhou under a different name. It wasn't until Suzai invited him to come out. This person had a high level of demonic magic, which was equivalent to the swordsman in the broken sea state of the Aoyama sect. Zhao Liu and Zhuo Ruzhui were no match for him even if they joined hands. Hua Yin looked at Zhao Liu and Zhuo Ruzhui expressionlessly with a kettle in his hand, as if he were looking at two dead people. All of a sudden, there was a soft clank sound. A person rushed out from Hua Yin's body. It was merely an illusion. In fact, the person came out from behind Hua Yin, but he moved too fast. The kettle dropped to the ground, making a crisp sound of pa. Hua Yin fell to the ground as well, a great deal of blood splashing out. His body was split in half. His demonic wheel, his ocean of energy, and his flesh and meridians were all broken in half. That person fell to the ground, his blood dripping down soundlessly without any delay, resembling the water drops falling off a lotus leaf. It was as clean as before, and his white cloth was still as white as snow. Staring at the person's face, Su Zai asked, "Jingjiu?" End of this chapter. Chapter 545. He said back, "Then that your face is as easy to recognize as mine." Su Zai said to Jingjiu, "It looks like it's true." The kettle dropped to the ground, and the steam rose up and turned into the strands, entering the brown bottle in his hand. It was a marvelous scene. The barren bottle could absorb all the moisture in the air. It was a formidable magic treasure. He was confident that he could kill Zhao Liu and Zhuo Ruzhui as soon as possible by cooperating with the Elder Huayin. Yet, Jingjiu came. The Elder Huayin was dead. Zhuo Ruzhui said, "Why bother wasting time by saying all this nonsense? No one will come." Su Zai knew that what Jingjiu said was true. The disciples of the mysterious dark sect hiding in the underground river should have all been killed by him and Zhao Liu. He had noticed earlier that Zhuo Ruzhui was wounded, and the hem of Zhao Liu's skirt was a bit wet. Zhao Liu and Zhuo Ruzhui were the two most capable swordsmen of the young generation of Aoyama. Moreover, Jingjiu was the immortal sect master of Aoyama. Now that Jingjiu was here in person, it was unclear how many swordsmen of the Aoyama sect were hiding in and around Izhou City. As such, those disciples had no chance of surviving. Looking at the corpse of the Elder Huayin, Su Zai thought of those disciples who had died in the underground river and the history of the mysterious dark sect. "In fact, I've never thought of becoming an enemy of Aoyama," he said sadly. Zhuo Ruzhui said, "It was you who sent Tong Yin to the West Ocean." Tong Yin went to the West Ocean, and the fairy book in the green sky mirror triggered a heavenly punishment. Taiping Jinren avoided the punishment, but Lu Xi turned into the spring rain. Lu Xi was the master of Zhuo Ruzhui. Su Zai said, "If so, can I take it that Tong Yin was secretly killed by you people?" The news that Tong Yin had left the Cloud Dream Mountain was strictly controlled by the Zhongzhou school. No one in the cultivation circle knew about it. However, Su Zai had kept in touch with Jingjiu in secret over the years. When he suddenly found that he couldn't get in touch with Tong Yin, he had many speculations. Zhuo Ruzhui said, "I will definitely kill Tong Yin, but he is hiding in Zhongzhou, so I can't do anything for now." Su Zai saw that Jingjiu's expression didn't seem to be fake, wondering what had happened to Tong Yin. Zhuo Ruzhui said, "Don't look at me like that. If I say I want to kill him, he won't live long." After a moment of silence, Su Zai looked at Jingjiu and asked, "Why don't you let us go?" Jingjiu said, "If I want to destroy your mysterious dark sect, you can't start over." This was what Jingjiu and Lu Xi had agreed on, so the mysterious dark sect had to be eradicated. "How do you know I'm not Wang Xiaoming?" asked Su Zai. "He is dead," replied Jingjiu. That night, the sword light and the broadsword light collided with the coal mountain, and the scorching sun gorge was destroyed. That young man, who looked like the main character of the story, became a dead man, even though he used the sun banner to protect himself. This ending was indeed hard to accept, but Jingjiu had seen too many similar things in his long career as a cultivation practitioner. For instance, Lo Huainan, Tong Lu, and many other talented cultivation practitioners in the early years. Wang Xiaoming didn't get a second chance, and neither did Su Zai. "Don't let it happen again," said Jingjiu. Su Zai knew that Jingjiu didn't want to kill him. Otherwise, he would be dead already. "Why did you let me live?" he asked. What is Bai Jinren's idea? Jing Jiu asked. Suzai laughed, his green face looking a bit eerie. You should ask Bai Zhao directly. Do you want to die? Asked Zhao Liu. I'm a demonic fetus, living in my dead mother's body, ready to become the source of my father's demonic energy at any moment. I tried everything I could to turn my father into a paralyzed man and took control of the mysterious dark sect. Then, I ran into Wang Xiaoming, such a freak. Do you think I can't figure out who he is? As for the promise made by the Zhongzhou school, do you think I'll believe it? I'm a lonely soul, drifting in this world since I was born, and the only place I could settle down was the mysterious dark sect. As a result, it was destroyed by your Aoyama sect, and I'm not allowed to rebuild it. What's the point of me drifting around like this? Few people in this world could compare to Suzai in terms of the tragedy of his life. Yet, his expression was calm when he said this, indicating that he was determined to die. Jing Jiu wanted to keep Suzai alive because he wanted to use this person, but the lone sword was in Liu Shisui's hands, so he couldn't control Suzai like he did with Xiaohe. Moreover, Suzai had made his attitude clear. How could he control this person? Jing Jiu said. The mysterious dark sect is your original nest. It's not a big deal if it's destroyed. You can always build a new home. Suzai understood what he meant. Can you accept leaving Aoyama? He asked while staring into Jing Jiu's eyes. Yes, I can, said Jing Jiu. Hearing this answer, the expression in Zhao Liu's eyes dimmed. It was unclear what she was thinking of. After a moment of silence, Suzai said, It's not that easy to found a sect. Zhou Ruzhui said, It's different if you have someone to support you. We can give you more than what the Zhongzhou school promised you, like the spiritual source of the Kunlun sect. Suzai asked, What Bai Jinren can give me, can you give me? Jing Jiu said, I'm the sect master of Aoyama. Who is she? I can help you detoxify the poison of Dan. Upon hearing this, Suzai's expression finally changed. The poison of Dan was the magic pill he took daily, which originated from a kind of devil crane on the southern islands. This kind of devil crane had a red crown on its head, which contained a strong poison, which could help stabilize the spiritual soul of the cultivation practitioners. The cultivation methods of the deviant cultivation practitioners were problematic. They could easily cause great pain and confusion in their minds. All kinds of evil deeds, such as killing the innocent, were the result of this method. If they wanted to keep their minds clear, the poison of Dan was often the last resort. The problem was that the temptation of the poison of Dan was as dreadful as the pain afterward. Once the cultivation state of the deviant cultivation practitioners was improved, they would need more and more poison of Dan, and the toxins would accumulate in their bodies. They would grow weaker and weaker until they died tragically in the end, unless they could break the demonic wheel and achieve the true great Tao of demonic God before they died, like the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect. The reason why Suzai wanted to die was not only because he was disheartened, but also because of the pain and despair caused by the poison of Dan. Nobody can detoxify the poison of Dan, he said while staring into Jing Jiu's eyes. Jing Jiu said, There's nothing I can't do. Suzai didn't believe what Jing Jiu said, but he had some hope when he thought of Jing Jiu's identity as the sect master of Aoyama. What do you want me to do for you? He asked. Whether it was to detoxify the poison of Dan or to help him found a sect, it was a great favor more important than life and death. He was not worthy of the Aoyama sect's help no matter how promising he was. Jing Jiu said, If the young mysterious dark sect asks for you, find a way to inform me. Suzai realized by now that the Aoyama sect wanted to use him to deal with Taiping Jinren and the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect. They won't believe me now, he said while shaking his head. Jing Jiu said, Since you could deceive Jian Shalai for so many years, you must have a way to win their trust. The three of them leapt up along with the swords, breaking through the clouds and landing on the boat. Zhao Liu felt a bit regretful. She came and went in a hurry and didn't have a chance to taste the local hot pot in Izhou. Zhou Ruzhui had the same sentiments. Smelling the scent of the jasmine tea on his sleeve, he looked at Gu Qing, wondering if he should ask him to brew another pot of tea. Gu Qing didn't even take a glance at him. He walked past him and came before the bamboo chair, asking, "Master, will Su Zai agree to it? He's a lonely and wild ghost right now, and he's willing to grab any straw. Aoyama is the strongest straw. There's no reason for him not to give it a try." Having said that, Jing Jiao turned to a corner of the sword boat, where there was a box covered by an oilcloth. Besides him, nobody knew what was in the box, not even the disciples of Shuriwa Peak who were responsible for controlling the sword boat. Su Zai called himself a lonely and wild ghost, and it was also Tong Yan's judgment. Tong Yan's analysis and plan played an important role in wiping out the remaining members of the mysterious dark sect so easily. He had cooperated with Su Zai in secret for so many years, so he was well aware of Su Zai's habits. The outstretched hand of the Zhongzhou school would be chopped off. The Platonist sect was merely a trial run, but it was a real one this time. The trip to Izhou was the pawn Jing Jiao had set up. Yet the most important thing was the meeting at the Guoqing Temple in autumn. The distribution of the cultivation resources in Chaotian would be decided at that time. The situation in Zhaoga City was a bit tense. The officials who had the backing of the Zhongzhou school didn't dare say anything to the emperor, but they attacked the chief commander of the Pure Heaven Bureau, Zhang Ai, again and again. The censorate and the Supreme Court seemed to have gone crazy. Nobody knew how long this important figure who had betrayed the Cloud Dream Mountain could hold on. It was still summer, and there were many days left before the meeting at the Guoqing Temple. This sword boat of Aoyama went to the East Ocean in advance. Everybody stayed on the sword boat. Jing Jiao left with Zhao Liu. Gu Qing noticed that the large box covered by the oilcloth was gone, but he didn't say anything. The sun had gradually set, and the ground was dark. The East Ocean in front of them was as dark as the Serpent Pond in Yamatsai. No light could be seen in the abyss of the heavenly well. Though there was no sunlight, Jing Jiao and Zhao Liu still wore the conical hats. It was because they didn't want to be seen by others. Jing Jiao walked to the edge of the cliff and turned over his palm slightly. Cold cicada, as white as jade, appeared in his palm. Sensing Jing Jiao's spiritual awareness, Cold cicada turned over hastily and rubbed its claws at a high speed to release those invisible mosquitoes. Zhao Liu's line of sight fell on the bottom of the heavenly well. Though she couldn't see those mosquitoes, she knew where they were going. Jing Jiao untied the oilcloth and opened the box. "Get ready," he said to Tong Yin, sitting inside the box. Nobody knew that he had brought Tong Yin out from the Hermit Peaks. Tong Yin opened her eyes and asked, "Are you sure it will work?" Jing Jiao said, "There are a few dozen days left. You chose the location yourself. As long as the underworld master cooperates with you, it won't be difficult." Tong Yin said, "What if the underworld master doesn't want to talk to you and kills me?" "Good luck," said Jing Jiao. The conversation couldn't continue. It was a quiet night. In the early morning, before the morning sun rose, Cold cicada suddenly moved twice. Jing Jiao knew that the mosquitoes had come back. Along with the mosquitoes was an ugly mountain monster who looked like a rock and a plant. Tong Yin knew that this mountain monster was the rumored commissioner of ghosts, who had a strong resistance to the amulets around the heavenly well, and it was said that he liked eating human flesh. Along with the decline of the underworld, the commissioner of ghosts hadn't been seen near the heavenly well for many years. The commissioner of ghosts was waiting for Jing Jiao at the underground 100 feet deep, his eyes gleaming with a gloomy glow. Tong Yin thought again that it was an unwise choice to join Aoyama. "Be careful on the way," said Zhao Liu. Tong Yin sighed and jumped down to the bottom of the heavenly well. She employed the escape method of heaven and earth to turn into a fallen leaf and landed on the body of the Commissioner of Ghosts. By now, Zhao Liu found that the Commissioner of Ghosts had a huge body even though he looked ordinary. Tong Yin looked like a real fallen leaf in his palm, which could be crushed into pieces at any moment. The Commissioner of Ghosts climbed down slowly, disappearing into the gloomy and dreadful abyss. Tong Yin had gone to the underworld. Chapter 546. Jingjiu drew back his line of sight, as well as cold cicada and mosquito. A white light fell down from a night sky like a lightning bolt and landed precisely in Zhao Lei's arms. Ada meowed once, indicating that nobody had seen what had happened. The crime of colluding with the underworld was a serious one. Even Tai Pingzhenren couldn't bear it back then, so Jingjiu didn't want to cause any trouble. Like the possible deal between the Zhongzhou school and the great priest of the underworld, there were many things they could do, but they couldn't be seen by others. "You guys go back first," said Jingjiu to Zhao Lei. The place he was going to was safe, so he didn't need to take Ada with him. Zhao Lei knew that he was going to Shueyu Nunnery, so she didn't say anything. She rode the thoughtless sword back to the sword boat with Ada in her arms. Rujui opened his eyes and glanced at her. He wanted to ask her something, but he didn't in the end. Gu Qing, who had vaguely guessed something, was meditating at the bow of the sword boat while facing the rising sun. He didn't even open his eyes once. The wind by the seashore of the East Ocean was cool and refreshing. It wasn't hot, even though it was the early summer. The valleys seemed to be in spring, and the peach blossoms in front of the stone steps were in full bloom. Jingjiu landed on the stone steps, picked a peach blossom, and knocked on the door gently. Soon, the door of Shueyu Nunnery was opened, revealing a lovely and clean face. She was the female disciple named Zhen Tao. Zhen Tao's qualification to participate in the Dao competition was taken away by Jingjiu when they were on the Cloud Dream Mountain, and she had witnessed the fiery battle between Jingjiu and Zhuoruzhui, so she had a deep impression of him. Though Jingjiu was wearing a conical hat, she still recognized him at first glance. She exclaimed in astonishment, "Jing, Secmaster?" She was suddenly summoned by the nunnery master when she was doing her morning class, telling her that a distinguished guest had come and asked her to lead him into the nunnery secretly. She didn't expect it to be Jingjiu. Jingjiu went straight to the quiet room. It was the quiet room with the round window facing the lake. The trees by the lake had all been cut down. The window was still round, the lake was still green, and the grass and trees were growing again. They had not been cut, but they added a sense of wildness and vitality. Jingjiu was quite satisfied, but he felt a bit dissatisfied when he looked at Guodong, who was still sleeping soundly. It had already been 5 years. The heavenly worm silk had already turned into flying catkins and disappeared, but she still hadn't woken up. Jingjiu sat down beside her and placed the peach blossom beside her. He reached out to hold her wrist and closed his eyes to sense the condition of her body. An hour later, he left the quiet room and went to see the abbess under the guidance of Zhen Tao. Passing through the roof corridor and passing by the gray wall, he saw the small green curtained sedan and confirmed his judgment again. That junior sister should have left many years ago. How is senior sister? The abbess of Shueyu Nunnery had a high cultivation state, but she hadn't cultivated for a long time, so she hadn't reached the perfect state yet. Her pretty eyes and brows were still like those of a young girl. It seemed that she had spent a lot of time in the cultivation state, so she didn't have to worry too much. She looked a bit like Zhen Tao. She should be fine, but I can vaguely sense some strange changes, said Jingjiu. Guodong had woken up much later than he had predicted, but she had cultivated the unique magic method in the world to begin with. He didn't know what kind of effect this change would have on her. The abbess of Shueyu Nunnery said, "I'm a bit worried because the flowers and plants by the lake are growing faster and faster." This was the phenomenon caused by the gathering of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Normally, it was a good thing for Guodong, who was sleeping soundly, but Jingjiu understood what she was worried about. Time was relative. The abbess of Shueyu Nunnery suddenly said, "That Grand Master of the Platonist sect is dead." Jingjiu didn't expect to hear this news here. After a moment of silence, he said, Jingshu should have been mentally prepared. Not many people had guessed his true identity, but the abbess of Shueyu Nunnery was a special case. Though Guodong and the chief nun of the nunnery didn't mention it, it didn't mean that they hadn't thought of it yet. The abbess of Shueyu Nunnery said, "It's impossible to prepare for the matter of life and death." It was because it would happen only once. Any preparation was merely a prediction, and it would never be complete just like the proof of immortality. Jingjiu said, so we shouldn't prepare as much as possible. The abbess of Shui, Yununri, said while staring into his eyes, everything will come to an end. Even ascension will have an end. Jingjiu said, it's true in terms of cause and effect. The abbess of Shui, Yununri, said, who can escape from the cause and effect? The abbess of Shui, Yununri, said, even if it will come to an end, it should be as late as possible. If it has a length, it should be as rich as possible. The abbess of Shui, Yununri, said, she has paid such a high price to catch up with you. Is it meaningful? The abbess of Jingjiu said, you're wrong. She has her own path. In a sense, he was just a scenery on her path. The abbess of Shui, Yununri, didn't continue this topic. He made a cup of peach blossom tea and pushed it to the front of Jingjiu, saying, I haven't congratulated you on becoming the head of Aoyama. Jingjiu remembered that Gu Qing had said that the gift from the abbess of Shui, Yununri, was the most generous. He took the cup of peach blossom tea and took a sip. Then he stood up and was ready to leave. The abbess of Shui, Yununri, looked at him and said, the peach blossom tea doesn't help the peach blossom, but it can clear the heart. Jingjiu didn't say anything. I'm not a big brother of the Guochang Temple, so I can use the two-mind connection, but the heaven-human connection can help me see some things clearly, like your lethal intent. The abbess of Shui, Yununri, asked, whom do you intend to kill? Jing Xian, replied Jingjiu. The abbess of Shui, Yununri, wasn't surprised to hear this answer, sighing, even a vicious tiger won't eat its cubs. You're still as heartless as ever. If she were still awake, Jing Xian will be dead a long time ago, said Jingjiu. After a moment of silence, the abbess of Shui, Yununri, said, I can pretend that I didn't see what had happened in the heavenly well. All the major cultivation sects were responsible for guarding the passages leading to the underworld. As the largest passage in Chaotian, the heavenly well was jointly guarded by the Guoqing Temple and Shui Yununri, and the abbess of Shui Yununri was closest to it. The amulets and formations were everywhere by the cliff edge of the heavenly well. It was impossible for the abbess of Hell, a monster as large as the commissioner of Hell and an eye-catching figure like Tong Yin, not to be noticed by Shui Yununri. Jingjiu had predicted that he couldn't conceal this matter from Shui Yununri, but he didn't expect him to use this matter as a bargaining chip. Why? This is the request of the emperor. Okay, as for the matter in autumn, we will support Aoyama. Don't worry about it. The division of forces in the cultivation world in Chaotian was quite simple. The forces in the north belonged to the north, and the forces in the south belonged to the south. It was almost impossible to persuade those sects to change their allegiance. The Grand Master of the Platonist sect had tried it, but she failed miserably and died later. In addition to these sects in the north and the south, the Guocheng Temple, Shui Yununri, the Dongi Taoist sect, the Baotong Zen Temple, and other sects had always been neutral. It seemed that Yamatai would join the ranks of the Guocheng Temple. After wiping out the mysterious dark sect and seeing off Tong Yin and ascertaining Shui Yununri's attitude, what Jingjiu needed to do next was to deal with the Guocheng Temple. It seemed that it was not too difficult to be the sect master of Aoyama. The sword boat of Aoyama broke through the morning sun and landed in Machio along with the morning sunlight. The two sides of the straight road leading to the Guocheng Temple and Machio were full of carriages and simple shacks in the fields, just like usual. The patients and their families who came to seek medical help looked at the huge sword boat and thought that it was a miracle. They knelt on the ground and kowtowed. Apart from the shock, people were more confident that the high monks of the Guocheng Temple could cure their illnesses. The main gate of the Guocheng Temple was wide open. Hundreds of monks stood in the square in front of the temple without making a sound. Zen Master stood at the front, while the monks of the preaching hall and the elders of each hall stood quietly behind him. It was an extremely grand scene. Jingjiu was now the sect master of Aoyama. He was completely different from the Aoyama disciple who came to listen to the preaching hall. The monks of the Guocheng Temple put their palms together and bowed to Jingjiu. Zhao Liu, Gu Qing, and Zhuo Rizhui bowed to Zen Master. Jingjiu did not move. Zen Master did not move either. The wind blew the monk's robe. The white cloth was moving as well. It was quiet in front of the Guochang temple. The morning sunlight grew brighter. In terms of status in Chaotian, the sect master of Aoyama was a bit higher than Zen master of the Guochang temple. But in terms of seniority and experience, Zen master had a much higher status, at least on the surface. It was a troublesome issue to decide who bowed to whom first. The monks of the Guochang temple felt it odd, wondering why Zen master behaved so solemnly that day, since he was usually amiable and casual. Zhu Rizhui and Gu Qing also felt it odd, wondering why the sect master behaved so solemnly that day, since he was usually the most casual and indolent person. In the end, neither Jingjiu nor Zen master bowed to each other. It was Zen master who said please, as he was the host. Others couldn't sense anything, but Zhao Lian knew what was going on, wondering what the two of them were up to. The Tranquil Garden had been destroyed a long time ago. It was rebuilt by the imperial court, and the back temple of the Guochang temple was also rebuilt. The doctor monks of the temple often exempted the patients from paying for the medicine, but they were quite generous in using the money from the imperial court. The stone pagoda was still in its original spot, but the ground under the pagoda was covered with moss again. The traces of time were more obvious to the cultivation practitioners. Jingjiu and Zen master sat face to face in the meditation room at the deep end of the Tranquil Garden. "It is said that you are the son of my old friend," Zen master said while staring into Jingjiu's eyes. "Call me uncle." Jingjiu, of course, wouldn't call him little friend. He hadn't forgotten that he had called him little friend until now. Everything was clear now. Zen master turned to look at the stone pagoda outside the window, remaining silent for a long time. A patch of auspicious cloud suddenly appeared in the sky, and a large lotus throne could be vaguely seen in the cloud. Zen master disappeared from the Tranquil Garden and came to the lotus throne. Sitting on the cloud, he faced the east and gazed at the ocean. Under the light of the morning sun, the ocean changed in countless colors. An hour later, Zen master returned to the Guochang temple. Looking at Jingjiu's face, he fell silent again for a long time. Then he said something. "You've chosen a pretty good face." Chapter 547. Many years ago, on the night when the fake manor cave of the immortal Jingyang was opened, Zen master saw Jingjiu for the first time. Then, he used the lotus cloud to protect this junior for a while. At the plum meeting, Jingjiu wrote down some bloody plum flowers in the cultivation tournament, which drew his attention again. A few years ago, at the Guochang temple, the incarnation of the unicorn came, and Taiping Jinren and the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect attacked him violently, but they all failed. The attackers were Lu Xi and the emperor, but Jingjiu was the key figure. During the Battle of the West Ocean, a sword light traveled across heaven and earth. After the spring rain, this young junior became the sect master of Aoyama. He couldn't help but think of many things. Zen master had suspected the true identity of Jingjiu a long time ago, but he didn't write a letter to ask about it. It was because he thought his suspicion was ridiculous. It was like Nan Wang's suspicion and Guodong's suspicion. Those who were closer and more familiar with Jingyang in their former lives couldn't believe it. Even if all the people in Chaotian were dead, the muddy river stopped flowing, the snowy peak in the northernmost part collapsed, and the huge whirlpool disappeared, how could Jingyang be defeated? As such, Zen master accepted the rumor, or in other words, he used the rumor to convince himself. Jingjiu was the descendant of Jingyang, and he had inherited Jingjiu's true inheritance and treasures. As a result, he could break through the cultivation states at an astonishing speed. It wasn't until today that he had finally learned the truth, and his mind was greatly impacted. Even though the Zen methods were profound, he still had to observe the East Ocean to calm his mind. The hot tea was poured into the teacup, giving off a faint white smoke, like the fog on the surface of the ocean in the morning. Zen master gazed at Jingjiu's face through the white smoke. His voice was as calm as his eyes, but full of puzzlement. "What is going on?" Jingjiu picked up the cup of tea and took a sip. The mist covered his face, and his voice was as vague and uncertain as his eyes. I have some unfinished business. Zen Master's fingers lightly tapped on the table. His rhythmic voice blew away the teacup and the mist on Jingjiu's face. What is it? Jingjiu put down his cup and said, I don't know. The young Zen Master could understand why this statement sounded incomprehensible. He took a deep look at Jingjiu and thought, so he still likes to pretend? Then what about Taiping? Why did he escape? Why did you let him go in the West Sea? Lu Xi is already dead. What's the point of saying all this? Where is he? It should be on the sea. A good ship of the Penglai treasure ship king was robbed. He's very weak right now, and super mundane world can make him feel a little more at ease. Jingjiu said. He took the dragon marrow and the lotus flower of the windy corridor. What do you think he wants to do? It was hard for ordinary people to think of anything from such a simple description, but Zen Master raised his eyebrows slightly and said, Reincarnation? He understood Taiping Jinren's current situation, so he only needed the word lotus to connect it to his thoughts. Jingjiu said, I don't know much about this. That was why he had come to the Guoqing temple so long in advance. Zen Master said, Lotus reincarnation is not a continuation of the previous life. This is different from you and Shui Nunnery. I don't think Taiping would choose this. Jingjiu agreed with him because Zen Master was the only person he knew who had truly reincarnated. But Zen Master was no longer the old monk of the Guoqing temple who had died under Taiping's hand. The cause and effect still existed, and the past was gone. The Dongi Taoist sect has a deep understanding of the lotus reincarnation. I'll bring some books for you to read later. Zen Master then asked, I've seen that formation back then, and it didn't have any problem. Why did something happen to it? Back when he discussed the Tao with Jingyang on the Shima Peak for 100 days, he saw 3 paths. Guodong chose one path, and Jingjiu was forced to choose the other one. Above these 2 paths was the path of ascension, which was to cut off the cause and effect. If there was something unfinished, it meant that the fate in the mortal world was not over, and the formation of dispersing smoke and cloud had a problem. Jingjiu waved his sleeve a few times, and dozens of bronze mirrors appeared in the air, reflecting the scenes in the meditation room. And then the images became more and more complicated. Zen Master had studied the formation of dispersing smoke and cloud, so he knew it was the method of splitting mirrors. But what he was wondering at the moment was where Jingjiu got so many good mirrors. Jingjiu reached out his hand to call the clean heart bell from outside the window. The bell gave off a crisp ring, echoing among the dozens of bronze mirrors. Zen Master took out a thin wooden stick and picked his ear with it, saying, The Mirror Sect and the Platonist Sect, it looks like you are indeed different from before. The tranquil garden had been repaired to its original state. The stone pagoda was in the same position, and the 3 roof corridors were the same as before. Zhao Leu had listened to the scripts here for many years, and she had lived through a few new years. She was quite satisfied with the result, so she went to the familiar spot and sat down. Ada also went to the second most familiar spot, the futon in front of the stone pagoda. Unfortunately, it was summer, and the leaves swept by Monk Dachang were not dry enough, so it was not comfortable to lie on, and the sunlight was a bit strong. It didn't take long before Ada got up and strolled to the roof corridor, lying on his back in the familiar spot. Along with a crisp ring, the bell flew away from his neck. He turned his head to take a look in that direction, his eyes showing a hint of resentment. Zhao Leu scratched Ada's neck. She was no longer as reserved and nervous as when she held Ada in her arms for the first time on Bihu Peak. Zhou Rivi led Gu Qing to the front of the small stone pagoda and said, This is the pagoda of the spiritual bones of the late emperor. Hearing this, Gu Qing bowed to the pagoda solemnly. I'm very familiar with this pagoda, said Zhou Rizhui sentimentally. He touched the body of the pagoda to express his gratitude. Back in the fierce battle in the Guoqing temple, those who participated in it were the important figures like the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect and the incarnation of the unicorn. He was merely the eyes of his master Lu Xi, and his cultivation state was the lowest. If he hadn't been holding this stone pagoda, he would have been blown away by the strong wind. While the two of them were talking, dozens of monks walked into the tranquil garden with books in their hands, heading toward the meditation room at the back of the garden. Seeing this scene, Gu Qing thought of what had happened on Shuriwe Peak a few days ago, and Zhao Lei thought of what had happened to the Mirror Sect, wondering if they really had something to do with books. Zhou Ruzhui asked uncertainly, "Is the sect master going to discuss the Tao with the Zen master? Is he good enough?" Speaking of the talent and cultivation, he had to admire Jing Jiao. But speaking of knowledge, the Zen master was a wise man who could discuss the Tao with the senior grandmaster Jingyang. How many people in the world could understand his brilliant ideas? Gu Qing said with a smile, "The house master Bu Qiuxiao didn't mention my master when we were in Jiaoga City." Zhou Ruzhui thought it was all talk. It had nothing to do with knowledge. In the meditation room that they couldn't see, Jing Jiao and the Zen master weren't discussing the Tao. They were reading books, but the way they read books was completely different from the way regular people read books. Nearly 1,000 books of the Buddhist sect and related books were pulled up by an invisible force, drifting around them and then falling into those mirrors. Those books began to open automatically, faster and faster, bringing up gusts of gentle wind. Jing Jiao and the Zen master had their eyes closed. It was unclear what they were reading. The gentle wind came out from the windows and came into the tranquil garden, traveling back and forth between the roof corridor and the courtyard. Zhao Lei felt it was quite cool. She stroked Ada, and Ada closed his eyes comfortably. Feeling the gentle wind blowing on his face, Gu Qing sat on the futon in front of the stone pagoda after a moment of bewilderment. He started meditating and resting with his eyes closed. The leaves, which were still green, were pushed by the wind and gradually surrounded the praying mat. Zhou Ruzhui sat on the porch, his two legs swinging back and forth, gradually becoming one with the rhythm of the wind. He felt that these gentle winds were very strange. They came from all directions and were omnipresent. Some of them brushed against his eyelashes, some of them gently blew against his ears, and some of them burrowed into his sleeves at extremely tricky angles. It was hard not to fall asleep amidst these countless cool breezes. As he thought of these things, his eyelids grew heavier and heavier, gradually drooping, and just like that, he fell into a deep sleep. When the twilight was at its darkest, Zhou Ruzhui opened his eyes and woke up. The setting sun shone on the stone pagoda, and the wind had died down. He was somewhat absent-minded, not knowing if it was still today or if it had already been a few days. Zhao Lei was stroking the cat in the roof corridor, thinking about something. Gu Qing was still sitting in front of the stone pagoda with his eyes closed. The fallen leaves had gradually crept up to his legs. Suddenly, there was a roar from the back of the tranquil garden. A fierce wind howled, swirling the leaves in the courtyard into the air. In the meditation room, innumerable books had fallen to the ground, either opened or closed. They looked like waves of varying sizes rising on the surface of the ocean, or like unmelted snow covering the ground. Zen master opened his eyes and said, "I read faster than you." Jingjiu said nothing. He picked up a book from the floor of the Lotus Scripture of the Dongyi Taoist school and continued reading. Zen master said, "You are so weak now. What if Baizhenren blows you to death in autumn?" Jingjiu continued reading. Without raising his head, he said, "This is the Guocheng Temple." The meaning of these words was very clear. "Now that you know who I am, will you still watch as something happens to me?" Zhou Ruzhui was sent flying by the fierce wind and landed on the ground. He had to take several steps back before he could stabilize himself. Turning his head to look at the tranquil garden, he saw that under the light of the setting sun, the green leaves in the sky seemed to form a sphere of intersecting green and red. It was a magnificent sight. Is this the power of Zen master? Zhou Ruzhui walked back to the tranquil garden in a state of shock. Zen master did not launch an attack. It was probably just an overflow of his spiritual will, yet it was still so powerful. He found that Zhao Lei was still sitting in the same place as before, thinking that it was indeed good to have the support of the Master Guard. She would not be as wretched as he was. Soon, he found that Gu Qing was also sitting in the same place. He couldn't help but feel somewhat annoyed, thinking that if he was still holding this stone pagoda, how could he have been blown away? The green leaves fell from the sky and sprinkled on Gu Qing's body, as if they were trying to bury him. Zhuo Ruzhui was about to laugh when he was suddenly taken aback. "Are you going to break through the state?" he asked. Hearing his words, Zhao Liu looked at Gu Qing, who was covered in leaves, and found that his qi was undergoing an obvious change. End of chapter. Chapter 548. In the courtyard, Zhuo Ruzhui looked at the scene in front of the stone pagoda, feeling a bit complicated. Those green leaves seemed to fall on Gu Qing's body, but they actually kept a small distance from his clothes, about a few pages of a book. This was the sign that the sword wills were about to leave his body, and it was also a sign that the sword ghost was about to take shape. It meant that he was very close to the middle state of the free travel, about 30 days away. Zhuo Ruzhui and Zhao Liu had been in the middle state of the free travel for many years, and they were on the verge of breaking through to the upper state of the free travel. Though they were much ahead of Gu Qing, he was still surprised by Gu Qing's cultivation speed. Even though the overflowing spiritual awareness of the Zen master and Jing Jiu sitting in the meditation room and discussing Tao helped Gu Qing a lot, cultivation depended on oneself. Zhuo Ruzhui knew that Gu Qing was the sword attendant of big brother Guanan Shan and Gu Han's concubine brother. He was indeed talented in cultivation, and Liang Wang Peak paid special attention to him. However, no matter how talented Gu Qing was in cultivation, he couldn't be better than Zhuo Ruzhui. Compared to those outstanding disciples of Liang Wang Peak, Gu Qing wasn't special at all. Moreover, Gu Qing had been busy dealing with the affairs of Shinma Peak over the years. Later, he stayed in Zhaoga City to teach Crown Prince Jing Yao, and recently he was busy dealing with the affairs of Aoyama for Jing Jiu. Under such circumstances, his cultivation wasn't affected at all. How'd he do it? Looking at the falling leaves, Zhuo Ruzhui suddenly had an idea. It was during the inherited sword competition that Gu Qing used the six-dragon sword style in order to defeat Jing Jiu. As a result, he was punished by the sect rules, and his cultivation was suspended for 3 years. During those 3 years, Gu Qing lived on Shinma Peak, chopped wood to build a house, and spent time with the monkeys. Later, he became the personal disciple of Jing Jiu. The change should have started from that moment. Zhuo Ruzhui felt the pressure. He decided that from now on, he would sleep less and practice more. He walked up to the stone pagoda and sat down not far from Gu Qing. He closed his eyes and began to cultivate. Looking at this scene, Zhao Liu did not say anything, but her eyes were slightly worried. Ada stood up and rubbed his head to comfort him, thinking that there was nothing to worry about. Didn't Lu Xi and Yuan Qijing do the same back then? Jing Jiu and Zen Master were reading in the room. Zhao Liu, Zhuo Ruzhui, and Gu Qing were cultivating in the courtyard. Ada was sleeping. Monk Dachong was sweeping the floor. Time slowly passed by in this pattern. The summer deepened, then lightened, and the wind rose again. However, today's wind had nothing to do with the pages that were turning on their own. Instead, it was the first hint of autumn in the world. Zhao Liu got up and walked out of the tranquil garden. Ada opened his eyes and meowed. He jumped into the courtyard, stepped on the stone pagoda soundlessly, and landed in her bosom. Zhuo Ruzhui opened his eyes and looked at Zhao Liu. Zhao Liu said, "I'm going out for a walk." Zhuo Ruzhui thought for a while and stood up. He shook off the fallen leaves on his body and said, "I'm going with you." The two of them were at the critical moment of breaking through the upper state of the free travel. They were standing on the threshold and only needed to take the last step. However, cultivation was like this. The last step was often the most difficult one. Even though they were of natural Tao quality and were rare geniuses in cultivation, they still needed a lot of time to break through, and they also needed a critical opportunity. After all, they were still in the category of normal geniuses, unlike Jing Jiu, who could break through the new state by lying on a bamboo chair or taking a bath in the blue lake. They had been sitting in the tranquil garden for dozens of days, but the critical opportunity hadn't come yet. It might be helpful for them to walk around in heaven and earth and seek some inspiration. Before they left the tranquil garden, Zhuo took a look at Gu Qing and found that he was still meditating. Zhuo couldn't help but feel puzzled, wondering why he was so diligent. Zhao Liu said, "He has been busy with affairs these years, so he doesn't have much time for cultivation. So he treasures it very much." Hearing this, Zhuo couldn't help but sympathize with Gu Qing. The two of them walked out of the tranquil garden and strolled in the temple. Zhuo said, "Cultivation is the foundation of a cultivation practitioner. Young brother Gu Qing has been working hard." "It's always hard to be the sect master," said Zhao Lei. Ada raised his head in her bosom and glanced at her. Zhuo said, "Young senior master, are you trying to persuade me to give up? That's impossible. The position of sect master was given to young senior master by my master. I have no objection to it, but who knows what will happen in the future." Zhao Liu said, "You are not Guinan Shan. Why are you so persistent?" Zhuo said with a smile, "Because I am more talented and younger. I hope to be older than Big Brother Nanshan. Most importantly, I have a good relationship with the sect master." If these words had come out of someone else's mouth, it would have sounded like bragging and would have been annoying. But when he said it, it made people feel a sense of respect. Ada looked at this young man with eyes full of appreciation. Zhao Liu didn't say anything more. "Young senior master, have you always had a problem with me because I won against you in the sword trial?" Zhuo asked innocently. "What can I do to appease your anger?" He knew very well that although Zhao Liu had kept a low profile in the Shunma Peak in recent years, no one could surpass her influence on the sect master. If he wanted to improve his relationship with the sect master, at least to be on par with Gu Qing, it was better to serve this young senior master first than a freeload at the Shunma Peak and kill many people for the sect master. Thinking of the sword trial, he felt a little regretful. What's the big deal about 2 more years of closed-door training? Why are you in such a hurry? Zhao Liu said, "You can't really defeat me. What's wrong with me?" Hearing this, Zhuo suddenly forgot to please her and said, "You suppressed the thoughtless sword at that time, but how do you know that I didn't hide anything?" Zhao Liu said expressionlessly, "If you really hid something, you wouldn't have said these boring words now." The two of them walked to the middle of the Guochang temple during this interesting or boring conversation. There was a grand hall not far from them. In a few days, the special plum meeting would be held in this grand hall, and all the cultivation sects in Chaotian would be present. It was unclear how the Aoyama sect would deal with the forceful attack of a Zhongzhou school. Walking past the pagoda forest, they found a quiet meditation room to the side. The sound of scripts could be heard from a farther place, which was melodious and calming. "Is this the White Mountain Meditation Room?" Zhuo asked with narrowed eyes. Taipingzhiren had lived there for a few years. Thinking of the turbulence caused by the Grandmaster in the world, Zhuo felt a sense of pride in addition to the fear in his heart. Many disciples of Aoyama should have the same feeling. After all, those evil deeds happened more than 300 years ago, and few people had witnessed them with their own eyes. Beauty and awe could only come from a distance. Zhao Liu didn't have the same feeling as Zhuo. It was because she often saw figures like Jing Jiao, and she had pursued Taipingzhiren in person. Back in the Guochang temple, she pursued him from the tranquil garden to the lonely peak outside the temple, and then went to Ozawa. She took a risk to break through the state in the process of pursuing him. Thinking about it, it was indeed a shocking event, but few people in the world knew about it. After leaving the pagoda forest and coming to the kitchen in the front of the temple, Zhao Liu said, "The young, mysterious Dark Master has been cooking here for a few years." Zhuo felt sentimental. Thinking that a demonic god of the first generation had become a cook, the late emperor had lived in seclusion here, and the Grand Master had been the chief monk here. The Guocheng Temple was indeed a marvelous place. By then, he had found that Zhao Liu came here specifically to see these places. What did Senior Master Zhao feel? He asked. "What was the occasion when you broke through the state last time?" asked Zhao Liu. I killed people in the illusionary realm of the green sky mirror, said Zhuo Ruzhui. I killed people as well, said Zhao Leiyu. Zhuo Ruzhui thought that she was indeed a member of the same generation. Speaking of killing people, the fights with the swordsmen brought her the most mental impact and inspiration. Since Zhao Leiyu met Jingjiu, she had seldom had the opportunity to fight with the swordsmen. It was the pursuit of Taiping that brought her the most inspiration. The reason she left the Tranquil Garden that day was to review the experience and find some opportunities to break through the state. After leaving the Guochang Temple, she came to the vegetable garden. It had been neglected for many years, and the house was covered with dust, and some of the furniture was even rotten. It was here that Lu Shui heard her sword sound. He chased after her without hesitation and joined hands with her to hunt her down. Zhao Leiyu went to the kitchen and searched around, but found nothing. The water in the pickle jar had dried up, and the radishes and cowpeas had gone bad a long time ago, so there was no way they could be eaten. "Are you hungry?" asked Zhuo Ruzhui. Zhao Leiyu said, "The temple is full of radishes and cabbages. It's too dull to eat." Zhuo Ruzhui was a bit startled, thinking that what she said was so carefree, and that the senior master Zhao was indeed a member of the same generation. The two of them rode their swords after leaving the vegetable garden. There are no towns around a Guochang temple, so there was no hot pot restaurant nearby. It was not appropriate for them to go to the village to eat. As such, they decided to barbecue bear paws or roast tiger meat. Ferocious beasts like bears and tigers could only be found in the deep mountains, and the place Zhao Leiyu wanted to go to was the deep mountains. The eastern side of the mountain was full of precipices. It was here that she successfully broke through the state, and then joined hands with Lu Shui to wound Taiping. At this moment, the thoughtless sword suddenly trembled slightly. Zhuo Ruzhui also sensed a pure and sharp sword will of Aoyama. The two of them looked down the precipice. There was a mountain stream, and there was a forest by the stream. While Zhao Leiyu and Ruzhui were looking for pickles in the vegetable garden, Xiao He, who knew how to make pickles, was washing her face by the stream. She and Lu Shui had left the 1,000 Miles Wind Corridor for more than 10 days. Seeing that they were not far from the Guochang Temple, and that they could return to the vegetable garden that brought her the most peaceful time, she was in a good mood. But in the next moment, her good mood was shattered by the sudden appearance of those human cultivation practitioners. "You, a fox spirit from Bulo Lin, dared to parade in broad daylight. Do you really think that the orthodox cultivation path has no one to deal with you?" The speaker was an elder of the Kunlun sect, and his energy was extremely profound. More than 10 disciples of the Kunlun sect stood together, looking at the stream with vigilance. An old monk stood upstream of the stream with a solemn expression. Hearing the words of the Kunlun sect elder, a hint of killing intent flashed in Xiao He's eyes. Lu Shui walked out of the forest, looked at those people, and asked, "What do you want?" The name of the Kunlun sect elder was Chunwan. He led the team to participate in the meeting of the Guochang Temple, so his cultivation state was extremely high. He knew Lu Shui's identity, so he said with an indifferent expression, "You should still be locked up in the sword jail of Aoyama." But since the Aoyama sect dared to let go of a demon like Taiping, it's not a big deal for them to let you go secretly. But that's your own business, and I don't want to meddle in it. But you shouldn't protect this fox spirit. Otherwise, don't blame us for being impolite. Xiao He raised her eyebrows slightly and said in a cold voice, "Do you know the relationship between us and the immortal sect master of Aoyama? Are you talking about Jingjiu? The great Aoyama sect has chosen a little kid to be the sect master." What a joke. Chenwen, the elder of the Kunlun sect, said while staring into Lu Shui's eyes, "And you, as a disciple of Yamatsai, you are protecting this evil fox spirit. How did House Master Bu teach you?" Hearing this, Lu Shui knew he didn't have to say anything else. He motioned for Xiao He to stand behind him and said to the other party, "Come on." Those disciples of the Kunlun sect were startled. It took them a while to understand what he meant, and they couldn't help but laugh out loud, thinking it was ridiculous. They looked at Lu Shui with eyes full of mockery and pity, as if they were looking at a lunatic. End of this chapter. Chapter 549. Lu Shui was a famous figure in the cultivation circle, especially among the young generation. He was of natural Tao quality and was trained by the Aoyama sect. He fought his way into Bulo Lin, destroyed the cloud platform, and killed Lo Huainan in the process. After he returned to Aoyama and was imprisoned in the sword jail, he was allowed to leave by his masters and became the personal disciple of Bu Qiuxiao, the house master of Yamatai. He was the master of several sects, and he won first place in the cultivation tournament at the Plum meeting this year. He was indeed formidable. However, the elder of the Kunlun sect, Chun Wan, had broken the sea state decades ago according to the classification in the south, and his prowess was exceedingly high. He was superior to Lu Shui in every aspect. Lu Shui said, "I'll do it," calmly and confidently under the circumstance that he had no hope of winning. It was indeed absurd in many people's eyes. It was similar to when Jingjiu walked to the chair and said, "I'll do it," under the gaze of thousands of people on the 9 peaks of Aoyama. After he said that, the sword bracelet on his wrist fell asleep quietly, as if it had fallen asleep. It was evident that the lone sword didn't think he would win. Xiaoyi had the same thought. She wanted to expose the relationship between Lu Shui and Jingjiu as soon as possible, even though she knew it was a bit embarrassing. Defeating someone in a higher state would only happen in the legends or people like Jingjiu. Chunwen didn't laugh out loud. He was fully aware that Lu Shui was not an ordinary person, and it would be very difficult to defeat him and wound him severely. Though the relationship between the Aoyama sect and the Kunlun sect had always been bad, and he intended to humiliate him that day, he didn't dare do anything to Lu Shui in the end. What Xiaoyi said sounded ridiculous, but it was actually quite useful. The whole of Chaotian knew that Lu Shui was Jingjiu's personal attendant. If the gatekeeper of the prime minister was considered a third-rank official, then the servant boy of the sect master of Aoyama was much more important than an elder of a normal sect. Xiaoyi had retreated into the forest. She had never fought since she escaped from Haizhou City many years ago. She was used to standing behind Lu Shui. Lu Shui took a step forward. The moment the soles of his shoes touched the ground, a strong gust of wind blew, swirling up the green leaves and causing them to dance in the air. The stream water splashed and turned into tens of thousands of water droplets. Like a whirlpool, they revolved rapidly around his body. As he stepped forward, he blasted toward the opposite shore from a distance of several hundred feet. Dark black smoke mixed with blood-like flames gushed out of his fist and turned into a black dragon, pouncing straight at the face of the Kunlun sect elder. Was this the secret demonic skill of the Blood Demon Church? Sensing the cold energy in the wind generated by the fist, Chunwen's expression changed slightly as he found that this young man was more powerful than he had expected. He employed the escape method of the Kunlun sect, turning into a series of shadows all over the sky, dodging the black smoke easily. He arrived in midair in an instant and struck out with his palm. It looked like a simple palm strike, but it covered the autumn sun, turning into a mountain-like shadow that pressed down on the ground. He was indeed an elder of the Kunlun sect in the Broken Sea State. His casual strike had the power of heaven and earth. It was impossible for Lu Shui to withstand such an earth-shattering palm strike. Seeing that he was on the verge of being killed, he took out a pen-like object from his sleeve and drew something in the sky, as if he was writing something. A rainbow appeared wherever the pen passed. The rainbow came very fast. It took only a moment for it to travel from the ground to a height of 1,000 feet in the sky. Its color was so bright that it didn't seem to belong to the human world. Crack! The rainbow landed squarely on Chun Wen's body. Regardless of how high his cultivation state was, he could only turn into the ink from the pen. He retreated rapidly and bumped into the precipice heavily. The terrifying vibration spread from the precipice to the ground and then to the stream. The stream water splashed in all directions. The swirl that hadn't dissipated yet grew larger, and the green leaves all over the sky flew out like sharp arrows. Those disciples of the Kunlun sect dodged in tandem, looking very embarrassed. Chunwen flew out from the precipice, his hair disheveled and his face pale. Bloodstains could be vaguely seen on his clothes, making him look even more miserable. He had been severely wounded. Staring at Lu Shui, his eyes full of shock and anger, he yelled sternly, "Is it the city guard pen? How is it possible?" The city guard pen was the most precious treasure of the Yamatai sect, as famous as the dragon tail inkstone and the other two treasures. It was a magic treasure of a very high level in the world, which hadn't appeared in the world for many years. He had never expected that Xiao would give such an important magic treasure to Lu Shui, a disciple who had joined the sect halfway through. Lu Shui didn't answer Wen's question. He took 2 magic pills to recover Jin Yuan as soon as possible. It hadn't been long since the city guard pen recognized him as its master, so his cultivation state wasn't high enough. He lifted the pen and drew a stroke between heaven and earth, but Jin Yuan's energy was exhausted. His face was as pale as a piece of paper, and he couldn't draw a second stroke. Chunwen let out a long whistle while drifting in the sky. A sword light followed the whistle and arrived by the stream in an instant. Lu Shui moved his left hand slightly, and the sword bracelet turned into the lone sword, piercing through the sky. The lone sword and the sword light collided in the sky, giving off a crisp sound. With a faint sound, a flying sword appeared on Lu Shui's left shoulder. But the tip of this flying sword was cut off by the lone sword, so it couldn't pierce through Lu Shui's shoulder. Fresh blood gushed out from the wound. Chunwen was in an even worse state. A bloody hole appeared in his chest, from which blood gushed out incessantly. The lone sword returned to Lu Shui's side. It was extremely bright and short, but it looked so dreadful. Lu Shui reached out to grab the broken sword on his shoulder and tossed it to the ground. The broken sword quivered slightly, as if it wanted to fly up. A series of cracking sounds rang out. The sword light illuminated the stream. The broken sword had been cut into pieces by the lone sword. Chunwen, who was in the sky, spat out a mouthful of blood. His blood fell like rain. What the F***ck is this sword? The flying sword that was connected to his Dao heart had been destroyed. His cultivation state wouldn't be affected, but it would take years for him to regain his strength. Chunwen was shocked and angry, and he couldn't control his emotions anymore. What was this sword? How could it be so sharp that it could cut his fairy-grade flying sword into pieces? Then he thought of the rumor after the Battle of the West Ocean, and a look of disbelief appeared in his eyes. Could this be the lone sword? As a swordsman, he naturally knew about the famous swords of Aoyama. Among those famous swords, the lone sword was the most lethal because it was the sharpest. Any swordsman who found himself facing such a legendary famous sword would feel awe and exasperation. He had Yamatai's city-guarding pen and the Aoyama sect's lone sword. No wonder he dared to challenge him. Chunwen was furious. He used his escape technique to evade the sword light that was following closely behind him. He arrived at the stream bank and shook his arms. A fire crane left his shoulders and pounced toward Lu Shui. Lu Shui's face was pale, but his eyes were burning with wildfire. He turned his right hand over and took out a folding fan, which he fanned toward the fire crane. The fire crane shrank rapidly in the wind and eventually turned into smoke, disappearing without a trace. However, the two of them had already met by the stream bank. The biggest taboo for a swordsman was to let his opponent get close to him. When they were fighting, they would never forget to keep a distance from their opponent. However, Chunwen's flying sword had been destroyed, and he was severely injured, so he had to make this risky move. Lu Shui's situation wasn't any better. It was a moment of life and death. Suddenly, a tranquil and peaceful breath appeared by the stream bank. Hundreds of prayer beads arrived soundlessly and formed a barrier, separating Lu Shui and Chunwen. The old monk upstream of the stream chanted the name of Buddha and said, "My two Taoist friends, please stop." The disciples of the Kunlun sect all knew this old monk. They knew he was Great Master Huiyuan of the Tunghua Temple, and they had met by chance at this stream bank. This Great Master Huiyuan had a profound understanding of Buddhism. He was compassionate toward the state of the universe, but he also abhorred evil. He was respected by people and fellow cultivators. Hearing this, Chun Wen's face darkened, but he still stopped. Lu Shui carried too many precious treasures with him. Even if he could kill him, who knew how much he would have to pay? Lu Shui also called back the lone sword. At this moment, the hundreds of prayer beads suddenly moved, blocking all of Chun Wen's escape routes. Chun Wen's face was pale. He felt a strong sense of danger. With a clear whistle, he ordered his disciples to attack. At the same time, he was ready to use his life-saving magic treasure. But it was still too late. Who would have thought that Great Master Huiyuan, who was known for his noble conduct, would suddenly kill someone when he was about to mediate between the two sides? Hundreds of prayer beads exploded at the same time. The booming sound was endless. The stream water evaporated and splashed, and then it was burned into smoke by the extremely high temperature. The clear whistle stopped abruptly. When the smoke and dust settled, Chun Wen's figure was no longer by the stream bank. Blood was everywhere on the rocks and in the water, still giving off steam. Great Master Huiyuan had already reached the precipice thousands of feet away and disappeared without a trace. It was extremely quiet by the stream bank. The slowly flowing stream diluted the blood on the rocks and flowed downstream. The sound was so soft, but it was so frightening when it fell into people's ears. The disciples of the Kunlun sect looked terrified. They helplessly looked around the valley and at their companions, as if they didn't know what had happened. Lu Shui was also at a loss. Suddenly, a few disciples of the Kunlun sect began to cry, their voices very desolate. A few sword lights illuminated the valley. The disciples of the Kunlun sect summoned their flying swords and aimed them at Lu Shui, yelling crazily, "You killed Senior Master!" It was unknown when Xiao He had come to Lu Shui's side. She waved her hand to set up a protective screen and said to Lu Shui in a low voice, "Go first." The previous moment of bewilderment stemmed from his kind nature, but Lu Shui quickly came back to his senses. The training he had received in Bulo Lin taught him that he couldn't just leave like that. He reached out his hand to block Xiao He behind him and looked at the disciples of the Kunlun sect, saying this should be Bulo Lin's conspiracy. Hearing his calm voice, the disciples of the Kunlun sect calmed down a bit. Thinking about what had happened earlier, they found it really too strange. But it was obvious that some people didn't want Lu Shui to break out of this trap so easily. But you used to work for Bulo Lin. Who knows if you colluded with them to come here? If you were really innocent, why didn't you kill the vixen next to you first? A cold voice came down from the sky. Following this voice was another person's silhouette. In the high sky, close to the empty realm, the figure of a large boat could be vaguely seen. It was the cloud boat of the Zhongzhou school. That person had jumped down from the cloud boat. Bai Qianjun was still in the sky, but the wind tunnel formed by the powerful magic had already attacked the bank of the stream. After the Dao competition, he had been staying behind closed doors on the Cloud Dream Mountain. His cultivation state had improved again, but his attacks were still as ruthless as before. He wanted to kill Lu Shui on the spot without any hesitation. Lu Shui had exhausted his Zhen Yuan, so how could he avoid the wind tunnel? No one noticed that a flying sword had drifted out from somewhere on the precipice. The flying sword was very strange. It didn't have any sword light. From a distance, the body of the sword was a faint gray color like the sky and the cliff. Even if someone saw the sword with their own eyes, they would easily think that it was the sky or the cliff. Moreover, the flying sword didn't have any powerful aura. It was like a fallen leaf drifting feebly in the wind. The fallen leaf drifted into the wind tunnel and then flew up noiselessly but quickly and arrived in the sky. Crack, crack, crack. A dozen tiny but deep cracks appeared on Bai Qianjun's body. He gave a muffled grunt and retreated several thousand feet diagonally, landing on a tree not far from the stream. The wind ruffled the treetop, He rose and fell with the wind, blood spilling out incessantly. He stared at the place on the precipice, his face extremely gloomy, saying, "Jour Rujui, do you only dare to sneak up on me?" The gray flying sword drifted back to the precipice weakly. Jour Rujui stepped onto it. He rode the sword to the stream and looked at Bai Qianjun on the tree, feeling quite baffled, saying, "You can't defeat me without sneaking up on me." End of this chapter. Chapter 550. Bai Qianjun sneered, but didn't say anything. He leaped down from the tree. He was covered in blood at the moment. If he were to stand on the treetop, he would be in a sorry state. Jour Rujui landed by the stream as well, but he didn't retrieve the gray flying sword. It hovered by his side, ready to strike at any moment. The flying sword stopped moving and revealed its true appearance. The sword had a light gray body and looked rather plain, but there were countless cracks on its surface, looking like the scales of a fish. The name of this sword was the Swallowing Boat, and it was quite famous in the cultivation circle. It was the flying sword of the highest state in Tianguang Peak, even higher than the Blue Ocean, and it had an extraordinary origin. Back when Zhuruzhui had just entered Aoyama, he was brought to Tianguang Peak by the immortal Lu Xi to stay behind closed doors, so he didn't have a chance to go to Yunxing Peak to find the sword. It was the immortal Lu Xi who went to fetch the sword and then gave it to him. It was against the rules of Shanghai Peak that the immortal Lu Xi raised a serious objection. But the immortal Lu Xi not only had a high cultivation state, but he was also good at pretending to be deaf and dumb. It was evident that the immortal Lu Xi loved this personal disciple the most. It was the first time for those disciples of Kunlun to see the rumored swallowing boat sword. They found this sword was not as lethal as rumored. It looked like a listless, salted fish. Yet, who dared look down on this flying sword? Who dared look down on Jour Rujui, who had drooping eyelids all day long and looked as if he would never wake up? As the most legendary young genius of the Aoyama sect, Jour Rujui stayed behind closed doors after he entered Aoyama for 20 years. As soon as he came out from behind closed doors, he defeated Zhao Leu, shocking the whole cultivation circle. However, his reputation had weakened after he lost to Jingjiu in the Dao competition of the Cloud Dream Mountain, and he had kept a low profile in the last few years. The impression of him in the cultivation circle was still the man in black in the illusionary realm of the green sky mirror, who was as bloodthirsty as a madman. It was only now that the Kunlun disciples remembered that he had always been the strongest among the younger generation. Bai Qianjun was not an ordinary cultivator, but a genius disciple of the next generation that Zhongzhou School had focused on training. Yet, he had been defeated so miserably by his sword again and again without any chance of winning. Just how strong was he? However, the current cultivation world was still ruled by the cultivators of the previous generation. The stream suddenly became absolutely still, no longer flowing. Accompanied by the whistling wind, the leaves rustled and fell, followed by a few figures. Yu Qianmen, the elder of Zhongzhou School, arrived at the scene with several disciples, releasing an extremely powerful pressure. The disciples of the Kunlun sect felt very uncomfortable. They hurriedly bowed and saluted before moving further away. Yu Qianmen glanced at Jour Rujui expressionlessly, then turned to look at Lu Shui. After that, his line of sight fell on Xiao He, who was standing beside the forest. His killing intent disappeared in a flash. Zhao Leu stood under the tree by Xiao He's side. It was unclear when she had arrived. Yu Qianmen was a swordsman in the Lianshu state. Among the peak masters of Aoyama, only Fang Jingtian and Guan Yuanjinren could defeat him. No matter how talented the young generation of Aoyama were, they couldn't pose any threat to him. However, he still felt pressured when he saw the scene in front of him, and he felt sentimental. The pressure didn't come from the present, but from the future. The sentimental feeling came from the regret and the disappointment toward his own sect. 3 people with natural Tao quality were standing there. They were all from Aoyama. The next generation of Aoyama's sect was extremely powerful. In another 100 years, there would be 3 more people in the upper limit of the broken sea state in Aoyama. To say nothing of Lu Shui. Zhuoruzhui had been the focus of many cultivation sects since he was born, and Zhao Liu was a resident of Zhaoga City. Why hadn't they snatched her back then? What about their own sects? Lo Huainan had died so early. Bai Qianjun had a bad temperament, so it was hard for him to achieve the Tao. And Tong Yin, could they count on Zhou alone? Yu Qianmin dismissed all these thoughts. What is going on here? He asked while pointing to the rocks by the stream. The water in the stream had stopped flowing, but the blood stains on the rocks didn't grow lighter, as if they had solidified. Zhuoruzhui chimed in. Yeah, what is going on here? Yu Qianmin didn't want to pay attention to him. He looked at Zhao Liu under the tree and said, "This has something to do with Lu Shui. Do you admit it? Or do you want me to go to the house Master Bu?" If the Aoyama sect admitted that Lu Shui was a disciple of Aoyama, then the Aoyama sect had to take responsibility for this matter. Otherwise, it would be Imatai's problem. Zhao Liu said, "It's okay if you ask us." Lu Shui wanted to explain what had happened, but Yu Qianmin ignored him. He still looked at Zhao Liu and said, "I'm going to take him away for questioning." Yu Qianmin's cultivation was far higher than Zhao Liu's, but his status and seniority in the sect were the same as Zhao Liu's. In his opinion, this kind of thing could only be discussed with her. Zhao Liu said, "Don't even think about it." The more concise her words were, the tougher she was. Yu Qianmin raised his eyebrows slightly. Those disciples of the Kunlun sect, who were still in shock and fear, were even more confused. Even though Zhao Liu and her 2 companions had natural Taoist quality, their realms were still not high enough. Powerful practitioners in the Lianshu realm could kill them with a flick of their fingers. Why was she so tough? Yu Qianmin's eyes fell on Zhao Liu's arms. The shadow of the treetop fell on her. It was not until then that people saw that she had been holding a white cat. The white cat yawned and woke up slowly. Many disciples of the Aoyama sect didn't know who the 4 great guards were, but the elders of the Zhongzhou school knew them very well. It turns out that Master White Ghost is also here. Yu Qianmin's face became more serious, but he still showed no fear. He said, "But this is by Zhenren's order." At this moment, Bai Zhenren was in the sky, on the cloud boat. Zhao Liu was not worried, because Ada didn't continue to pretend to be asleep, which meant that he knew what was going on. As expected, a melodious bell rang in the distance. The sudden battle and assassination by the stream finally alerted the Guoqing temple. Then, an extremely clear bell rang in the sky. Compared with the bell in the Guoqiang temple, this one was much softer, but it was more penetrating. It was unclear whether it was a Nanping bell or some other magic weapon. It was the signal for them to return. Yu Qianmin didn't say anything more. He led the Kunlun disciples and left decisively. Yet, everybody knew that the Zhongzhou school wouldn't let it go so easily, and there would be another incident at the plum meeting a few days later. The stream water came back to life, flowing downstream again, making a gurgling sound. Xiaoyi walked to the side of Lu Shui. Seeing the blood stains on the rocks being washed away by the water, she suddenly felt the wind on the stream was a bit chilly, her face turning pale. What had happened that day was too eerie, and she was quite familiar with it, which made her feel terrified. "Senior Master Zhao." Lu Shui bowed to Zhao Liu earnestly. In the current Aoyama sect, his young master was the one he admired the most, followed by Zhao Liu. Zhao Liu was his idol at the South Pine Pavilion, and she was also his companion in Guiyun City later. Big brother, after bowing to Zhuoruzhui, Lu Shui didn't know what to say. It had been a few years since they parted ways in the illusionary realm of the Green Sky Mirror. Though they had met many times in the royal palace of the Chu Kingdom in the illusionary realm and were familiar with each other, it was a different place after all. "This sword looks really good." Looking at the swallowing boat sword, he remarked, "It looks like that porcelain. What kiln is it from?" "I forgot." Xiao He reminded him in a low voice, "The Z kiln." "Yes, it's the Z kiln." Lu Shui spoke and did things sincerely, and it was easy for him to convince others and make them feel like getting close to him. Hearing this, Zhuoruzhui felt a bit annoyed, as he thought that many cracks on the sword were caused by the peak of the universe back then. And what was the sword bracelet on his wrist? Why didn't he exchange it with him? In Chaotian, the lone sword and the first child sword were the two flying swords of the highest state. Nobody would be willing to exchange for them. Even if Lu Shui was willing, he wouldn't give them up. The name of the swallowing boat sounded better, and it suited his temperament better. "Why are you here?" asked Zhuoruzhui. "I'm here to help, of course," said Lu Shui. One of them asked the question inexplicably. The other answered it matter-of-factly. The plum meeting of the Guochang Temple was different from the plum meetings where the young cultivation practitioners competed with each other in Jiaoga City. It was more like the plum meeting 600 years ago. During the plum meeting 600 years ago, the human race was facing a great danger. Though the plum meeting this time was not as important as that time, it was still very important. If the Zhongzhou school and the Aoyama sect, the two leaders of the orthodox cultivation sects, had a falling out with each other, Chaotian would be in a precarious situation. At such a critical moment, Lu Shui had to come over, not to mention that his young master was the sect master of Aoyama. It's not a gang fight, so it's useless to have more people. And you can't use the precious treasure of Yamatsai to help Aoyama when the time comes. Thinking of the pressure the Aoyama sect was facing, Zhuoruzhui didn't feel sleepy anymore, sighing, "It all depends on what the sect master thinks of it." At the plum meeting in spring, the attitude of the Zhongzhou school was very clear and resolute. They had to reduce the share of the Aoyama sect, even if it was only a symbolic one. "I'm afraid that my young master is too lazy to think about it," said Lu Shui. An honest man usually told the truth. Zhao Liu knew that Jing Jiao had such a temperament, but he must have been prepared since he sent Tong Yin to the underworld. "Let's talk about it when we get back," said Jing Jiao. As they were about to arrive at the Guochang Temple, Xiaohe saw the deserted vegetable garden. She couldn't help but feel sad when she thought of her peaceful life here. She couldn't stay in the vegetable garden because it was not safe outside the temple. Nobody knew what the Zhongzhou school and those orthodox cultivation sects would do. Lu Shui couldn't bring her to Yamatsai either. Running in and outside the windy corridor and staying with them were two different concepts. As such, he had no choice but to bring her to Jing Jiao's place. The tranquil garden was still as quiet as before. Gu Qing was woken up by the bell of the Guochang Temple. Over the years, the Shima Peak had kept in touch with Lu Shui, which was a correspondence between Jing Jiao and Xiaohe. The vegetable garden and the inn were all arranged by Jing Jiao himself. But Jing Jiao didn't exchange pleasantries with Xiaohe. He said to Lu Shui, "My master is still inside." Wait a moment. It was not until now that Lu Shui learned that Jing Jiao was discussing the Tao with Zen Master, thinking that his young master was truly remarkable. Gu Qing noticed Xiaohe's pale face. Thinking of the bell, he asked what happened. Lu Shui told him what had happened by the stream. After a moment of silence, Gu Qing said, "The remnants of Bulo Lin have been quiet for so many years. Why did they suddenly jump out this time?" After Shuang Sun's cloud platform was destroyed, Bulo Lin seemed to have been wiped out, but in fact, its foundation was not shaken. The battle at the Guochang Temple was proof of that. Before that, who would have thought that Monk Duhai, the principal justice of the Guochang Temple, was the villain of Bulo Lin? There must be many figures like Monk Duhai in the various sects and the imperial court. For example, that Master Huiyuan, who suddenly killed Elder Chun Wan of the Kunlun sect today. He must have followed us all the way from the windy corridor to here and finally found an opportunity. Lu Shui had lived in Bulo Lin for many years and had sorted out countless files, so he was quite familiar with the way that Master Huiyuan acted. Of course, that Master Huiyuan didn't want to kill Lu Shui. Otherwise, Lu Shui and Xiaohe would have been dead a long time ago. What kind of opportunity did he want? Thinking of the man who went to pick the lotus flowers, Xiaohe's face turned paler. It became extremely quiet in the tranquil garden because everybody was thinking of that man. What did Tai Pingzhen want to do? Did he want to provoke the Aoyama sect to fight against the center sect, Kunlun, and all the sects in the north? Nobody could answer his question. The autumn wind blew the fallen leaves in the courtyard, piling them up around the stone pagoda. Ada walked to the pile of fallen leaves and crouched down, curling up into a ball. A huge shadow appeared in the distant sky. It was the cloud ship of the Zhongzhou school, which brought a great deal of pressure to this world and these young people. Looking in that direction, Zhuo Ruzhui suddenly said, "Let's fight then." The red sun cast a beautiful glow over the ocean, gradually covering the shadow of the cloud ship, as if it had been swallowed up. End of this chapter. Chapter 551. The cloud boat of the Zhongzhou school didn't stop near the Guochang temple, but went directly to the East Ocean, hovering in the sky and competing with the setting sun for its brilliance. Seeing this scene, Zhuo Ruzhui was filled with lofty sentiments, and he uttered those three words. Lu Shui felt his blood boiling, but he remained silent out of habit. Zhao Liu was quite calm, thinking that if they really wanted to fight, then they would just have to fight. Gu Qing didn't say anything, wondering how he could defeat them. Zhuo Ruzhui spun his head around to look at them, and demanded, "Can't you people say something convincing and convincing?" It was then that Jing Jiu's voice rang out from the back of the tranquil garden. "Come in." They entered the meditation room behind the tranquil garden, and found that the Zen master had already left. There was a hint of tiredness on Jing Jiu's face. Both solving the problem of the formation of dissipating smoke in clouds and guessing the relationship between Taiping and the lotus flower required a great deal of mental energy. Gu Qing told them what had happened by the stream again, and also told them about their guesses. Zhuo Ruzhui asked, "What does the great master Taiping want to do? Does he want to plunge the entire land into chaos like he did years ago and kill all the mortals?" "It's to protect himself," Jing Jiu continued. "He is at his weakest. The more chaotic the cultivation world is, the safer he will be." Nobody understood what he meant, including Zhao Liu, Lu Shui, and Xiao He, who knew that Taiping Zhenren had picked the lotus flower. Jing Jiu didn't tell them all of his deductions. He looked at Lu Shui's slightly dark face, wondering if his big brother had given up on turning this child into the next him. Seeing Jing Jiu looking at him, Lu Shui knelt down hastily and kowtowed 3 times with great respect, saying, "Congratulations, young master." Xiao had already knelt down as well. Zhao Liu was the master of the Shenma Peak, so there was no need for her to kneel. Gu Qing didn't care and knelt as he pleased. Zhuo Ruzhui felt a little helpless. He slowly kneeled on the floor, but he did not kowtow. Jingju knew that Lu Shui would definitely kowtow a few times, so he accepted it calmly and said, "All right, let's go. She'll stay here." Lu Shui was now a scholar of Yamatsai, so he naturally had to return to Yamatsai. He understood the young master's meaning and understood the young master's temperament even more. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly thought of something and asked, "Young master, how is the chair I made?" Jing Jiu said, "Not bad." After receiving this evaluation, Lu Shui left happily and contentedly. Zhuo Ruzhui had seen this pair of master and servant interact with each other many times in the illusionary realm of the green sky mirror, but he still couldn't accept it until now, like the other matter. Looking at Lu Shui walking toward the outside of the tranquil garden, Jing Jiu said while shaking his head, "I'm not used to seeing him wear the scholar's robe. He looks like a farmer no matter what." Jing Jiu said, "Shui is very good at farming. It was he who taught me how to farm." Not only Zhuo Ruzhui, but Zhao Liu and Gu Qing also didn't understand why Shui wanted to learn farming. Since he couldn't figure it out, he didn't bother thinking about it. Thinking of the cloud boat in the sky above the East Ocean and the upcoming meeting, Gu Qing asked, "Master, are we really going to fight them?" Jing Jiu said, "Even if we're going to fight them, it's not now." Anyone could tell that the Aoyama sect was much weaker than the Zhongzhou school in terms of the most powerful fighting force. As such, the northern sects like the Kunlun sect became more and more unbridled, and they even dared attack Lu Shui. No one could fill the vacancy left by the departure of the immortal Lu Ci in a short time. Though Jing Jiu could become the sect master, He couldn't fill the vacancy. Feeling surprised, Gu Qing asked, "Should we let him go this time?" Looking at the outside of the tranquil garden, Jingjiu knew that the other party had arrived. "If I wanted to let him go, I wouldn't have to come here in person," he said. Someone asked to see him. It was Bai Zhao of the Zhongzhou school. Hearing the voice of Monk Dachong, Zhu and Gu Qing bid farewell to Jingjiu naturally and walked toward the outside of the tranquil garden. A moment later, Zhao Leu walked out with her hands clasped behind her back. Looking at Ada in the pile of fallen leaves at the foot of the pagoda, she intended to carry him away, but she didn't. Ada looked at her back and was about to follow her, but he suddenly realized what she meant. As such, he curled up again and blended in with the pile of fallen leaves, his ears pricking up. Bai Zhao was standing in the courtyard. Jingjiu was sitting under the porch. There was an indescribable atmosphere in the courtyard, faint but distinct. It might be a sense of unfamiliarity, but it wasn't entirely the case. When they were at the West Ocean, the two of them had glanced at each other from distance. But apart from that, they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Time could dilute many things. For instance, the 6 years in the snowland seemed to be his previous life. Jingjiu was very calm, not sentimental, not even sentimental. This was something that the cultivation practitioners had to experience. However, the long years of cultivation would sometimes make many things fade away and sometimes make many things more intense. This was probably the difference between water and wine. Bai Zhao had been asleep during the 6 years in the snowland, but Zhao Leu felt that she could still remember those nights, the firelight, and the figure of his back. She looked at Jingjiu in silence, not uttering a single word, as if she was waiting for something. Of course, she didn't wait for Jingjiu to speak first. She wouldn't behave like a little girl in a fit of pique, and she was fully aware that it was useless for Jingjiu. She was waiting for the twilight to get thicker and the autumn wind to rise again. Along with the rustling sound, the fallen leaves fell down along with the wind. They were dyed red by the setting sun, falling on her body like the rain, like the fire and the flowers. It was a beautiful scene. An appreciative expression appeared on Jingjiu's face. Beautiful scenes and smart people were one of the few things he was interested in this world. She still remembered the begonia tree in the Jing house in Zhaoga City and the fact that he liked to watch the begonia flowers fall on her body. She was certain that Jingjiu still remembered those things, which was enough for her. She lifted the hem of her skirt gently and walked to the corridor, sitting on the floor across from Jingjiu. The white ribbons fell to the side of her body like the clouds that had absorbed the rainwater. Jingjiu still didn't say anything. Bai Zhao took 2 steps forward and put his hands on the floor through the ribbons, his body leaning forward slightly. This was what the little princess of the Qin kingdom had done back then. Yet, Jingjiu wasn't the little prince of the Chu kingdom who couldn't refuse her anymore, so he wouldn't let her jump into his bosom again. He reached out a finger and pointed at the center of her eyebrows, stopping her body in midair. Time stopped here. Hiding in the pile of fallen leaves in the courtyard, Ada watched the scene, thinking that it was actually quite a beautiful scene. After a long while, Bai Zhao sat back down and said shyly, "I want to hug you." "They're going to fight," said Jingjiu. Bai Zhao said, "It's because they're going to fight." Jingjiu smiled faintly, saying nothing. Bai Zhao picked up a golden fallen leaf from the hem of her skirt and put it in Jingjiu's hand gently. Sitting in the pile of fallen leaves in the courtyard, the expression in Ada's eyes grew a bit gloomy. Looking at his face, Bai Zhao said softly, "I thought you were extraordinary the first time I saw you." Jingjiu said, "Many people are like this. You'll get used to it." For instance, the people on the Shenma Peak, the cat, and the cicada wouldn't be surprised, frustrated, or possessed by the devil when they saw his face. Bai Zhao said with a smile, "But the surprise you brought to the world is still far beyond my imagination. How could you become the sect master?" When she said this, she was indeed smiling, feeling proud and happy for Jingjiu. But in the deepest part of her smile, there was a clear trace of regret or even sadness. If it were the same situation before, Even if Jingjiu was a talented disciple cultivated by Aoyama, it would still be possible. But now that Jingjiu became the sect master of Aoyama, it was impossible, because she would be the next sect master of Zhongzhou. Before Bai Zhao stood up and was about to leave, he said something. I know Big Brother Tong Yin should be in Aoyama. Thank you. How could the Zhongzhou school let go of Tong Yin? It's been a great deal of effort to find him over the years, but they couldn't find him anywhere. She and Tong Yin were like brother and sister, so she knew what he was thinking at that time, so she could guess where he was most likely to go. Jingjiu said, he is not in Aoyama. Bai Zhao knew he didn't have to lie to him. He was a little surprised, wondering where his big brother had gone. Jingjiu suddenly said, you have to be careful at some critical moments. Bai Zhao was silent for a while, and then asked, can you be more clear? Jingjiu said, no, because I haven't calculated it clearly. He seemed to understand something, but he didn't know why. Bai Zhao understood what he meant, and then left. Jingjiu picked up the golden leaf and raised it to his eyes to have a look. It was impossible to find two identical leaves in the world, no matter the shape of the stalk or the direction of the veins. And he had never thought about which leaf to treasure. It grew on the willow branches and fell after dusk. It was the leaf itself. In the pile of fallen leaves, Ada looked at him in silence. After a long time, Jingjiu let go of the leaf. The golden leaf didn't break. It drifted to the front of the pagoda and fell on the pile of fallen leaves, covering Ada's eyes. Jingjiu didn't lie. Tong Yin was indeed not in Aoyama. He was in the underworld. There was a faint smell of burnt leaves in the air here, which should be from the underworld river. The underworld river looked like an underground river formed by lava, but it wasn't exactly the same. He had seen it with his own eyes. There were corpses' boats covered with flowers traveling on it. There were only 3 colors in this world: black, white, and fire. The mountains, rivers, and fields all looked dull and monotonous. The river of fire was flowing in the gloomy sky, as if it would fall down at any moment, giving people a terrifying and depressing feeling. For the human race, the underground world without sunlight was the most barren world. For the human cultivation practitioners, this world without the spiritual energy of heaven and earth was an unbearable hell. If they stayed here for too long, even the strongest cultivation practitioner would be killed by Zhen Yuan. Tong Yin didn't know how long she would stay in the underworld, her face pale. A bright blue color and a few dark figures suddenly appeared in the black and white sky. They were the underworld master and his disciples. Tong Yin noticed that there was a small child among those disciples. The inhabitants of the underworld were all short, or in other words, pocket-sized. This child was even smaller, with smooth black hair and delicate eyes and brows. The fringe in front of his forehead looked like a leaf, and it was hard to tell if he was a man or a woman. He looked like a good-looking puppet. Yet, the underworld master showed a respectful attitude toward the child, saying, "Your Highness, this is the envoy from the upper world." The child pulled back his fringe and shot a glance at Tong Yin, his eyes full of curiosity, saying, "Thank you for your hard work, envoy." Having said that, the child was brought back to the ground by the disciples of the underworld master, as if he came here just to meet Tong Yin. Tong Yin had guessed the identity of the child, but she fell silent. The underworld master said, "This is the next king of the underworld. Do you think Jingjiu, the immortal sect master, will like this child?" After a moment of silence, Tong Yin said, "He might like it better if his hair is cut short." The underworld master said with a small smile, "Though I don't understand the reason behind it, I think it makes sense." As they were talking, the sky on the other side of the underworld suddenly grew brighter, illuminating an intermittent and unstable passageway. In the passageway, a figure with a formidable energy was traveling at a high speed, looking like a flash of lightning. It was above the abyss leading to Chaotian. Looking in that direction, the underworld master said, "This is the 12th priest. He has a wild heart and pure blood. It will be troublesome for me to deal with him." "He will die," said Tong Yin. "Thank you," said the underworld master. End of this chapter. Chapter 552. Looking at the disappearing figure in the distant night sky, the underworld master suddenly felt sentimental, saying, "In our world, this is called flying in the sky." There had been many passageways between Chaotian and the underworld, but those who could pass through the abyss and enter those passageways to reach the surface of Chaotian were the living beings and the weakest dark spirits. Even if those weak dark spirits went to Chaotian, they had no other use except to make the humans sick a few times and scare a few timid people to death. If the swordsmen of the underworld wanted to go to Chaotian by relying on their own strength, they would face a lot of obstacles, the same as the ascension of the human cultivation practitioners. This was how the Heavenly Well by the East Ocean got its name. It wasn't until there were more and more swordsmen of the underworld, and those passageways grew stronger, that it became easier to travel to Chaotian. It was also the period when the relationship between the humans and the underworld was the most tense and the wars were the most frequent. During that period, many swordsmen of the human race came to the underworld through the passageways and destroyed all the hopes of the underworld. The underworld master said, "We call those human swordsmen who came to our world the heavenly demons of the outside world." The war between the humans and the underworld had ceased a long time ago, so Tong Yin didn't feel sentimental about it. "Are there many secret passageways like this?" he asked. The underworld master didn't answer his question, saying, "The sword wielded by the immortal Lu Ci has caused some changes in the earth sources, and some ancient passageways have reappeared." Tong Yin was aware that what he said was not entirely true, but he didn't point it out. "I have to make sure that the exits of those passageways are safe," he said. The underworld master said, "First of all, we have to make sure that those priests have the courage to take your bait and go to the upper world. There aren't many who are as ambitious as the 12th priest. You see my plan. Do you think it's feasible?" Tong Yin asked. After a moment of silence, the underworld master said, "If I didn't know the relationship between you and the immortal sect master, I would think that you really intend to help the grand priest obtain the seal of the king of the underworld. The only thing that could make those priests of the underworld risk their lives to go to Chaotian was the seal of the king of the underworld. Of course, in the beginning, the king of the underworld seal would not have been a direct target. The bait was just information and preparations related to the king of the underworld seal. The plan that Tong Yin had devised was extremely grand, but it was also impeccably detailed. If the priests of the underworld followed it, they might really be able to see the seal of the king of the underworld. The problem was that this trap was fake from the very beginning. What Tong Yin intended to do was to lure the people on the side of the grand priest to show up in Chaotian at a certain time and place. The underworld master was responsible for selecting the candidates and helping him set up the scheme. As for what would happen after the priests showed up in Chaotian, it was Jingzhou's problem. Tong Yin said, "If those priests continue to hesitate, I want to meet the high priest." An eerie glint flashed on the translucent face of the underworld master as he demanded, "Do you have a death wish?" Looking at his face, Tong Yin said, "I finally believed the rumor. You are indeed the personal disciple of Taiping Zhenren." "I'm a student," said the underworld master. Tong Yin said, "I'm a disciple of the Zhongzhou school. As long as the high priest doesn't know that I've left Zhongzhou, it's not a big deal to meet him. But I have to make sure of this first." The underworld master said, "My people have been keeping an eye on him. Something has happened to his soul fire. He has been bathing in the underworld river, and he hasn't contacted by Zhenren." Tong Yin suddenly asked, "It's indeed difficult to contact the upper world from here, but how did you contact Jingzhou? Since the immortal sect master trusts you so much, you shouldn't ask too many questions," said the underworld master. A gust of wind rose in the Guoqing temple. It was not the chilly autumn wind this time, but the slightly salty and damp wind from the ocean. The cloud boat of the Zhongzhou school started slowly, heading toward Machio. This was the signal that the plum meeting was about to begin. Yamatai, the Baodong Zen temple, the Dongyi Taoist sect, the Ozawa sect, the Mirror sect, the Platonist sect. All the sects qualified to participate in the plum meeting had arrived at the Guoqing temple in succession a few days ago. The cold signal bird came from the northwest. and the sect master of Kunlun, He Wei, came to the temple angrily after learning of the tragic death of his young brother. The small green curtained sedan from Shui Yu Nunnery parked quietly in front of a meditation room. Compared to the plum meeting held in the spring and the previous plum meetings, the number of participating sects was fewer, but the level of the participants was much higher. It was because everybody knew that the plum meeting this time was very important. The Aoyama sect and the Zhongzhou school, the two leaders of the orthodox cultivation sects, were on the verge of moving from a stalemate to a more dangerous situation. For the sake of the whole of Chaotian, the various sects would like to persuade the two sides to reconcile. If they couldn't persuade the two sides to reconcile, they would have to choose a side. There was no wine in the Guochang temple, and there were not many scenery to see. The cultivation practitioners of various sects gathered together, talking about the recent events. The Master Huiyuan is the great-grandmaster of the Tonghua Temple. How could he suddenly appear there? Is he really on Bulo Lin's side? How could Bulo Lin conceal his identity so deeply? What did the Tonghua Temple say? The chief monk of the Tonghua Temple arrived at the seashore of the East Ocean 3 days ago, asking to see Bai Junren. The cloud boat didn't respond. Yet, this matter has something to do with Lu Shisui. Didn't anyone ask about it? Elder Yu Qianmin intended to take Lu Shisui away, but he was stopped by the people of the Aoyama sect. The Aoyama sect had 3 disciples with natural Dao quality in the last few years. It's unbelievable. His family is the strongest of the young generation. I wonder when Tong Yin will come out from behind closed doors. Speaking of youth, the current sect master of Aoyama is the real young man. Upon hearing what an elder of a sect said, the atmosphere had changed. Some people left in silence. It was obvious that they didn't want or dared not talk about Jingjio behind his back, but some people's discussions became more heated. Jingjio had become the sect master at such a young age, which was rare in the history of the cultivation circle, and the Green Mountain sect was not a regular sect. It seems that the Aoyama sect is not as powerful as the Central State, but I'm afraid the Aoyama sect will still be the Aoyama sect in the future. But the more it is so, the Aoyama sect should keep a low profile and wait for the future. That's right. If we want to avoid a head-on conflict, I'm afraid the Aoyama sect will have to give way first. The Aoyama sect has no reason to do so. Why not? All these years, how many talismans, crystals, and treasures have the sects used to suppress the passage? And how many demons from the underworld has the Aoyama sect killed? Is it because the Aoyama sect doesn't want to kill? It's because there are no demons from the underworld to kill now. How many friends of the Aoyama sect died in the past? That's exactly what I mean. Since there are no demons from the underworld to kill, and the Aoyama sect has no passage to suppress, why should we divide things like 600 years ago? You didn't do anything, so why should you take things and take the biggest share? Even mortals don't have to do this, do you? As the white clouds dispersed, the giant ark took off again. The people of the Zhongzhou school had already entered the main hall. The cultivators could see clearly that other than the young disciples like Bai Zhao and Bai Qianjun, the 3 valley masters of the Zhongzhou school, including Yu Qianmin, had come this time. All of them were powerful cultivators of the void refinement realm. As for the person at the front who seemed to be shrouded in clouds and mist, impossible to see through, it was naturally the rumored Bai Junren. How should the Aoyama sect deal with such a big battle formation? Guan Yu and Junren would definitely have to be there, and Fang Jingtian would probably have to come out of seclusion in advance. Only Yuan Qijing would be able to contend with the other party. Suddenly, the sound of a bell rang and dissipated, like the green smoke in the pagoda forest. The Guocheng temple became very quiet. The cultivators of the various sects stopped discussing. They looked towards the pagoda forest and saw a few people walking out. Zhao Lei walked at the front with the white cat in her arms. Gu Qing was holding a sword that was wrapped in layers of cloth. It exuded a sense of solitude. Zhuo Rizhui was hugging himself. Jing Jiu was at the back. There were only a few people from the Aoyama sect. Chapter 553. The people of Aoyama were easy to recognize. It was because they were the last to arrive, and it was really easy to recognize them. The handsome man with a tranquil energy and a sword in his bosom was the future teacher of the emperor, Guqing. The man with drooping eyelids and falling asleep while holding himself was Zhuo Ruzhui, the personal disciple of the immortal Lu Xi. The woman with a small braid, the black hair on her temples tousling, and the black and white pupils in her eyes bright and shiny was Zhao Lei. The unparalleled man in white was Jing Jiao. Countless gazes were fixed on him. Both the swordsmen of the underworld and the cultivation practitioners of Chaotian ascended in the sky, but Jing Jiao was the only one who had soared to the sky. He had become the sect master of Aoyama's sect and the person with the highest status in Chaotian after only a few decades of cultivation. This had never happened in the history of the cultivation world. The people bowed to him in tandem, but they had a complicated feeling in their hearts, including curiosity, dissatisfaction, and mockery. Jing Jiao uttered, and nodded to a few girls he knew before walking into the grand hall. The cultivation practitioners of various sects followed him into the grand hall. The plum meeting had officially begun. Many chairs had been prepared in the gloomy grand hall. Bai Jinren sat in the first chair on the left, followed by Bu Qiuxiao of Yamatai and the other 3 valley masters of Zhongzhou School. Hiwei of the Kunlun sect and other sects sat behind them. Jing Jiao sat in the first chair on the right, followed by Zhao Lei, followed by the representatives of Bazawa, the Platonist sect, the Mirror sect, and other sections. The camps of the two sides were very clear, and the feeling of confrontation was even clearer. Yet, nobody knew what was the attitude of Yamatai at the moment. Seeing Lu Shui and Shi Yun standing behind Bu Qiuxiao in silence, many cultivation practitioners felt at odd, wondering what was going on. Apart from these 2 rows of seats, there were also some special seats. Zen Master sat at the head of the table, cross-legged in his chair. Just like the people of Dongyi Dao, he sat cross-legged on the Kong. It was somewhat inelegant. Shui Yu Nunnery's green-curtained sedan stopped in silence behind them. Duke of He, who represented the imperial court, and Zhang Yi, the chief commander of the Pure Heaven Bureau, sat by Zen Master. The look on Zhang Yi's face was terrible. After the incident of the Fiend Prison, he had broken off relations with the Zhongzhou School. He had been criticized by the chancellors in the imperial court in the last 2 years, and was under great pressure. Hiwei's expression was also very unsightly. Naturally, it was not because he had rushed here overnight from Kunlun Mountain. He stared at Jing Jiao without shifting his gaze. Jing Jiao ignored him and looked at Bai Jinren in silence. He couldn't see through the layer of cloud and fog, even though there was only a distance of 100 feet between them. The fact that he couldn't see through the cloud and fog meant that she had improved her cultivation state over the years, and his was still too low. Zen Master didn't speak the entire time. It was quiet in the grand hall. The atmosphere grew more and more eerie, and the crowd grew more and more uneasy. They looked around reflexively in an attempt to relax. Just like that, people suddenly discovered an interesting phenomenon. On the side of the Zhongzhou School, Bai Jinren was a famous figure a long time ago. Yu Qianmin and the other 2 valley masters, as well as Hiwei and the others, had restrained their spiritual wills, so they didn't show any signs of aging, but they could still see the traces of aging on them. On the side of the Aoyama sect, Jing Jiao, Zhao Lei, and Zhuo Ruzhui, and Gu Qing standing behind them were all young people, and so were other sections. For instance, Sensei of the Platonist sect, Zhen Tao of Shui Yu Nunnery, Cain Yang of the Mirror sect. The 3 young girls were so conspicuous in the dark and tense grand hall. Cultivation was the cultivation of time. The longer one lived, the higher one's cultivation state would be. What were the masters of these 3 sects thinking? What was the Aoyama sect thinking? Then let's begin. Zen Master raised his head and spoke as if he had just thought of this matter. Everyone thought that the first to speak would be the Zhongzhou School or the Duke of He who represented the Emperor God. Unexpectedly, Hiwei, the head of the Kunlun sect, stood out first. He stood up and stared at Jing Jiao, saying, "A few days ago, Our elder Chunwen died tragically in the hands of your disciple. I would like to ask for an explanation, Headmaster Jing. Jing Zhou wouldn't explain, not because He Wei wasn't qualified to do so, and not because he wanted to be pretentious, but because he knew Aoyama didn't need to speak. Since Lu Shui was involved, it was impossible for Yamatai to ignore it based on his style of doing things. If you're talking about my student, Headmaster He, then please be careful with your words. Bu Xiao stood up from the chair and said to He Wei, "It was Master Huiyuan of the Tunghua Temple who killed Chunwen, not someone else." Since He Wei was going to accuse Bu Xiao, he knew that Bu Xiao would say so. He said with a sneer, "Even if it was Huiyuan who killed Chunwen, the evil thief of Lin, how could Lu Shui be clear of suspicion? Why did younger brother Chun have a conflict with Lu Shui at the foot of the precipice? Everyone knows that it was because of the vixen from Lin. That vixen had done many evil things in Lin, and her hand was stained with blood. Could it be easily cleared of suspicion just because she said that she abandoned the dark side for the light?" Back then, the Aoyama sect drove her out of Aoyama and imprisoned Lu Shui in the sword jail. It means that the immortal Lu Ci didn't trust these two people either. The meaning of this statement was very clear. The Kunlun sect suspected that Lu Shui was still in contact with Lin, so they set up an ambush with Master Huiyuan at the foot of the precipice and killed the elder of the Kunlun sect. In some people's eyes, this inference was quite reasonable. It was because Ying Xiao had been with Lu Shui all the time, and she was not clean to begin with. Bu Xiao said in a deep voice, "My student is a rare gentleman in the world. Headmaster He, please don't make such baseless guesses again." He Wei asked in a cold voice, "So my younger brother died just like that?" Bu Xiao calmed himself down and said, "This matter is indeed a bit strange. We'll just have to investigate it carefully. My condolences, Headmaster He." He Wei said in a mocking tone, "Count on you to investigate? Or with the Aoyama sect?" A trace of anger flashed across Bu Xiao's face as he asked, "What do you suggest, Headmaster He?" He Wei said with an indifferent expression, "I believe that the house master should believe in Bai Zhenren's virtue and the conduct of the Zhongzhou school. Why not let the Cloud Dream Mountain investigate it?" The anger on Bu Xiao's face grew stronger. Zhao Leiyu raised her head, and Zhuo Rizhui raised his eyebrows, ready to scold him. Jing Zhou didn't show any reaction. He thought that his big brother had indeed predicted this. If the Kunlun sect insisted on condemning Lu Shui, Yamatai and the Zhongzhou school would only drift apart. He Wei's proposal was tantamount to dragging the Zhongzhou school into the matter and asking Bai Zhenren to come forward and uphold justice. In his and many others' eyes, Yamatai's so-called neutrality had, in fact, led to Jing Yao becoming the crown prince and had offended the Zhongzhou school deeply. The Zhongzhou school would never let go of this opportunity. As for the subsequent reaction of the Aoyama sect and Yamatai, would it lead to the intensification of the conflict between the two sides? Wasn't the purpose of the Zhongzhou school to force the Aoyama sect to back off in this Guoqing temple conference? Zen Master didn't say anything. Seeing Jing Zhou's reaction, Zhang Eai had to keep silent as well. Zhuo Rizhui stared at the three valley heads of the Zhongzhou school, thinking that he couldn't defeat any of them. Zhao Leiyu looked at Bai Zhenren, who seemed to be enshrouded by clouds and mist, thinking that he couldn't defeat her even with the help of the cat. Gu Qing held the sword of the universe in his arms and looked at Bai Zhao, who was standing behind him in a low-key manner. He wanted to confirm the thoughts of the Zhongzhou school from her expression, but he couldn't find anything. Now they were waiting for Bai Zhenren to speak. The atmosphere became more intense. "That's all for this matter." Bai Zhenren's indifferent voice rang out. Hearing this, the grand hall became even quieter. A small black wildcat sneaked in from nowhere. Feeling the terrible atmosphere, it turned around and ran away in fear. Ada turned his head in Zhao Leiyu's arms and looked at the cat, thinking, "Why didn't I see you when I was here?" Hearing this unexpected answer, He Wei stood still and kept silent for a while. It seemed that he had aged a lot in an instant. After a while, he sat back in the chair slowly and didn't say anything until the end. I did write a little less these days. I might even stop writing tomorrow. If I stop writing, I will report in the daytime. I don't want to, but I really don't have time. 72 is here. I have to eat, drink, chat, and go sightseeing with this fatty. It's all his fault. M. Chapter 555. Ada, crouching in Zhao Liu's bosom, looked at the small black wild cat running away. Many gazes followed the cat, and then moved up to the distant mountains. Nobody took a look at Wei, because they felt sorry for him and didn't want to embarrass him too much. The atmosphere in the grand hall had been tense earlier, but it was depressing and awkward now. The sect master of the Kunlun sect had offended both Yamatai and the Aoyama sect in order to avenge his young brother, but he had no choice but to give up because of what Bai Jinren said. Was this the dignity of the strongest swordsman in Chaotian? Yet, by doing so, Bai Jinren wasn't afraid that his allies like the Kunlun sect would leave him. The autumn wind blew over from the distant mountains, bringing a chilly feeling to the quiet grand hall. The purpose of cultivation was to live a long life, but they had to spend their time watching such a show for the sake of cultivation. Many people felt bored, thinking that they shouldn't be in the Guochang temple at the moment, but should go back to the mountains and stay behind closed doors. There were no 4 seasons in the underworld, only 2 periods of light and darkness, which are determined by the rising and falling of the heavenly fire in the underworld river. As such, there was no bleak autumn wind here. The capital was located on a huge black rocky mountain. On a broken cliff a few miles away, there were a few ordinary thatched huts, but the golden leaves on the top of the huts looked magnificent. This was the sole residence of the eldest disciple of the underworld master, so there was no need for a swordsman to guard it. As far as the populace of the underworld was concerned, the eldest disciple of the underworld master was like a god, so they didn't dare get close to him. All they could do was kneel down at the foot of the broken cliff and kowtow to pray. Looking at the populace of the underworld at the foot of the cliff, Tong Yin thought of the patients on both sides of the official road in Machio who came to the Guochang temple for treatment, a hint of unfathomable emotion showing on her pale face. The heavenly fire grew dimmer, and the underworld river grew quieter. The night was not much different from the daytime in the underground world. Tong Yin pulled back her gaze and walked into a thatched hut. The gloomy room was brightly illuminated by the golden leaves and crystals, forming a sharp contrast with the outside world. A child was sitting in front of a table, writing. The black hair on his forehead fluttered gently, but the hand holding the pen was as steady as a rock. The handwriting on the paper was also very clear and could even be considered beautiful. Tong Yin was a bit surprised. This child was a member of the royal family who had been separated from the outside world and was brought back by the underworld master a few years ago. How could he be proficient in the human language and characters? Even though the underworld master had taught him diligently for a few years, it was still an outstanding achievement for him to master it to such an extent in such a short time. It wasn't until now that Tong Yin didn't know the real name of this future king of the underworld. The underworld master told him to call this child Apiao. Apiao was an interesting name. In the ancient language of Chaotian, this word meant ghost. Tong Yin looked at the way Apiao was writing and felt as if someone had placed a chess piece on the opposite side of the chessboard. Jingjiu liked playing chess the most, but he didn't like playing chess with Jingjiu. As such, he sat down across from Apiao. Apiao put down the pen in her hand and looked at Jingjiu in silence, waiting for him to speak. The cause and effect is not the theory of the Zen sects. It's the direction of time. Tong Yin picked up the pen and drew a non-existent line in the air between the two of them, saying the direction of time is a line with a beginning and no end. Apiao asked after some thought, "What if it's a circle?" Tong Yin said, "If the beginning and the end could be connected, many interesting things would happen. But as far as our experience is concerned, this line can't be connected. So the cause and effect can't be broken." pressed Apiao. At least the people living here can't do it, and the ascendants can't do it either. Nobody can get rid of the cause and effect. The most they can do is break the cause and effect. Tong Yin said, if the immortal sect leader agrees, you'll be the next king of the underworld. Then, where will you lead this world? Apiao said, I've read a lot of ancient books in the past few years. Our ancestors first thought about self-preservation and not being exterminated by the heavenly demons of the outer realm. Later on, they were unwilling to give up and wanted to share the sunlight and rain on the ground. They wanted to get the fertile land that could produce a lot of food. I've eaten rice, and it's indeed much more delicious. Tong Yin said, this is a very natural and understandable thought, but I don't think the immortal sect leader can accept this answer. Apiao said seriously, the sunlight and rain may be good, but they're not suitable for our cultivation method and even conflict with our bloodline. Our tribe has been living underground for thousands of years and has long become one with this place. We can't be separated at all, so why do we have to go out? It's just that it's really too hard here. Perhaps you're willing to show your generosity? Tong Yin looked at his eyes in silence. Looking at the flickering light in his eyes, she couldn't tell if this child was lying or if he really thought so. They're all very good, but they're not suitable for me, so I don't want them. This was a very easy reason to understand, but not many people could do it. I've heard that the crown prince of the human race has a teacher now, and he's also a celestial master of Oyama. Apiao suddenly laughed and said, if that's the case, I'm really similar to him. Why do you say so? Tong Yin asked. Apiao opened her eyes wide and looked a little naive. Aren't you also a celestial master of Aoyama? I guess so, Tong Yin said. The naive look in Apiao's eyes suddenly turned into cunning and malicious. She lowered her voice and said, but I know you're Tong Yin from Zhongzhou School. Tong Yin said calmly, you don't have to tell me this. It's because I'm not your cause and effect. Who will it be then? Asked Apiao curiously. Tong Yin said, if nothing unexpected happens, you will become the personal disciple of the immortal sect master. Will he enter the underworld? Asked Apiao, feeling a bit surprised. Tong Yin shot him a glance and said, of course it's you who will go up. Having said that, he walked out of the thatched hut and came to the foot of a tree by the cliff's edge. It was unclear what kind of tree it was, but it still grew thickly in the underworld where there was no sunlight. It looked like a conspicuous large ink block in the dark and gray world. Standing under the tree, the underworld master's blue cloth looked like a spot among the ink blocks. It's such an important matter, but he doesn't want to come down and take a look himself. Is he afraid of death or lazy? Both. Tong Yin followed the line of sight of the underworld master to look at the distant sky. A distant passageway was illuminated, and a figure flew up along with the lightning. Another one has gone, said the underworld master. It looks like they have believed it. I suggest you don't do anything to Apiao, said Tong Yin. The immortal sect master doesn't like trouble. The underworld master said calmly, Her Highness is the future of the underworld. I don't dare do anything to her. The small wild black cat returned to the outside of the hall stealthily. He felt a certain energy inside the hall was attracting him. His line of sight passed through the crack of the door and saw a white cat with long hair, lying gracefully in the bosom of a young woman. The energy of the young woman was a bit chilly, making him feel scared. He wondered if it had something to do with the other young woman she was looking at. That young woman was saying something in a low voice. What was the amulet paper? What was the crystal stone? The herbs of the Dongi Taoist sect didn't sound tasty, but the devil pill should be good. The small wild cat couldn't understand what the young woman was saying, but he knew that this young woman in a white skirt was very beautiful and had a feeble expression on her face, but her voice was very calm and gentle, and it was quite comfortable to listen to. The people in the hall had the same thought. Innumerable gazes were fixed on by Zhao, with a hint of appreciation in their eyes. Hearing her describe the requirements of the Zhongzhou school in a calm voice, the autumn wind seemed to become much softer, and the falling leaves could be seen clearly. Her energy was deep and calm, indicating that she was on the verge of completing her yuanying. She would be able to break through the godly state in 20 years. The whole of the cultivation circle knew that she was born with a lack of talent, and many people thought that she would encounter many problems in her cultivation. Even though she could keep up with the other geniuses in cultivation by relying on the magic methods and magic pills of the Zhongzhou school in the beginning, she would be left far behind in the later stages. Unexpectedly, she was still as good as Zhuo Ruzhui and Zhao Liu until now. This had something to do with the profound resources of the Zhongzhou school, but many people in the hall knew a certain secret. Thinking of the 6 years they spent in the snowland, they looked at Jing Jiu reflexively. Jing Jiu's eyelids drooped slightly, but everybody knew that he was still awake. Bai Zhao didn't avoid him on purpose. He talked to him calmly while looking at him. Zheng Tao gripped her sleeves tightly. She felt very sad. Qin Yang shook her head. She suddenly found that Xiang Wanshu was looking at her from among the crowd of the Zhongzhou school, so she returned the greeting with a faint smile. Sensei sighed, thinking that it would be a great time for them to bring Brother Jean back from White Town and eat the barbecued fish and drink the wine. It was unnecessary to pretend that they didn't know each other and talk about such boring things. It was all Jing Jiu's fault. How could he become the sect master of Aoyama so early? Not only these young girls, but also those masters and masters of the older generation felt a bit sentimental when they saw Bai Zhao talking to Jing Jiu calmly while standing in front of him. The story between this young man and woman was quite famous in the cultivation circle. Bai Zhao stopped using the magic method. The map in the Grand Hall disappeared after turning into specks of light. Chao Tian hasn't been attacked by the army of the underworld for more than 300 years. They showed up once in a very small number, and they only showed up in the last 60 years, so it's hard for them to cause any trouble. The Cloud Dream Mountain has never denied the sacrifice made by the cultivationists of Aoyama, and they don't dare show any disrespect. However, if I have to say something disrespectful, since it was Taiping Jinren who made the mistake, Aoyama should take more responsibility. She turned to Zen Master and said, "We still insist on the request made in spring. The detailed list of the quota has already been sent to Zhaoga City." Zen Master sat in the chair with his legs crossed, indicating that he had nothing to say. Bai Zhao turned to Zhang Ai and said, "Senior Master Zhang, the Pure Heaven Bureau should have seen the list we sent." The more respectful she called him, the worse Zhang Ai's expression became. According to the rules of the Plum meeting, the Imperial Court won't get involved in this matter. As long as Aoyama agrees, the Pure Heaven Bureau will act according to the new rules. It was quite troublesome to collect, refine, and distribute the cultivation resources such as crystals, magic pills, ocean pearls and bright silver, red gold, devil pills, and animal blood. 600 years ago, Taiping Jinren relied on his powerful deduction ability, the full support of Shuai Nunnery, the secret support of the Guoqing Temple, and the encouragement of the previous emperor to persuade Zhongzhou School and other major cultivation sections. It was from that moment that the peace in the cultivation circle began. It was a significant matter that Zhongzhou School wanted to change the rules of the Plum meeting, but the proportion of the quota they requested was very small, and the extra quota of the Western Sea Sword School seemed acceptable to the Aoyama sect. However, as the great Grandmaster of the Foggy Island, Nanshu, said before his death, if Aoyama took a step back, would it continue to take a step back? No matter how big the step was, taking a step back was still taking a step back. Taking a step back in order to advance was the last resort of the weak. Bai Zhao walked to the front of Jing Jiu, waiting for his answer. Jing Jiu lifted his head and looked at her, saying, "First of all, the quota of the West Ocean is ours, and nothing else will change." Bai Zhao looked at Jing Jiu in silence, knowing that there would be more to it. Looking at Jing Jiu, Zhao Liu suddenly understood what he was going to do, her eyes growing brighter. Whoosh! A small hole appeared in the autumn clouds in the sky, and a flying sword arrived at a high speed. This sword letter came from Aoyama, and it fell into the hands of Guqing. It was given to Zen Master by Jing Jiu's eye signal. In the next moment, the bell rang in the Guoqing Temple. The cold signal bird flew over, bringing the news from the other side. The Pure Heaven Bureau sent a letter to report. The cultivation practitioners in the Grand Hall felt uneasy due to such a large number of people. "Did something happen in White Town?" asked Bu Xiao. After reading the sword letter, Zen Master glanced at Jing Jiu meaningfully, saying, "No, it's an important figure from the underworld." Bu Xiao arched his eyebrows slightly, asking, "Who is it?" "The 12th priest," replied Zen Master. Bu Xiao had heard of this swordsman of the underworld who was famous for his ambition and bloodthirstiness. "Since it's not the Grand Priest or the Underworld Master, it's not a big deal for the projection to come here," he said with a slightly cautious tone. "It's his true body," Zen Master said while shaking his head. Upon hearing this, there was an uproar in the Grand Hall. A swordsman of the underworld had come to Chao Tian in his true body. It had been many years since such a thing had happened. Was this the omen of the invasion of the underworld? Bu Xiao stood up abruptly and asked sharply, "Where is he? How are the casualties among the populace?" "The 12th priest appeared on the cold mountain, and then," Zen Master said after shooting a glance at Jingjiu, "he was killed by the cultivationist Aoyama." End of this chapter. Chapter 556. Along with the voice of Zen Master, the atmosphere in the Grand Hall had changed constantly. The people felt it was absurd in addition to being shocked. Earlier, the situation was so serious that all the sects and the imperial court sent letters one after another, as if a storm was coming and the underworld was about to invade. Bu Xiao slammed the table and stood up, but in the next moment, that important figure from the underworld had died. The small black wild cat sensed something was out of place. He meowed fearfully and ran to the distance again. The people suddenly thought of a problem. What Zen Master said was that the 12th priest was killed by the cultivationists of Aoyama on the Cold Mountain, but Aoyama was in the far south, tens of thousands of miles away from the Cold Mountain. This matter was obviously suspicious, but many people hadn't figured it out yet. Even if they thought of it, they couldn't say it out loud. The autumn light and shadow shone on the outside of the Grand Hall. The bell had stopped ringing, and the voice of Isaiah rang out again. "Why is the cultivationists of Aoyama there?" The sky was so vast that no two birds would bump into each other, unless the eagles were ready to strike. Jingjiu didn't answer this question. It was Gu Qing who did. He said calmly, "It's because it's what we should do." This answer was in line with the status of the sect master of Aoyama and the style of the leader of the orthodox sects, but it also meant that it was a tasteless official statement. Like Zhao Liu, Gu Qing had guessed Jingjiu's plan, though he didn't see Tong Yin enter the underworld from the heavenly well. The reason why the Zhongzhou school asked the Aoyama sect to give in was straightforward. It was because there were no devils of the underworld in Chaotian to kill them. Didn't they have them now? Jingjiu stood up, ready to leave. Bai Zhao asked him, "Is this just the beginning?" "Yes," Jingjiu said. Bai Zhao said, "Shall we wait a few more days in the Guochang temple?" Jingjiu nodded calmly and walked out of the hall. Zhuo Ruzhui crossed his arms and followed. His eyelids were still drooping, but his head was raised quite high. His nostrils were very clear as he stared at them. Holding the sword of the universe in his arms, Gu Qing followed behind them. The sense of coldness coming out from the layers of coarse cloth was no longer cold, but a faint intent of killing. Zhao Liu walked at the back with Ada in her arms. The white cat narrowed his eyes and looked at the people in front of him. His eyes were filled with contempt and mockery. The people of Aoyama left, and the conference could only come to an end. Some people were discussing the movements in the underworld nervously. Some people came to the front of Zen Master to greet him and ask for a confirmation. Some people were talking to Bu Xiao in a low voice. But no matter who it was, the one who paid the most attention to Bai Junren. The seemingly real cloud and fog prevented people from seeing Bai Junren's face and expression, so they couldn't tell what she was thinking and feeling. They only knew that she didn't say anything else today except for asking the Kunlun sect to give up the investigation of that murder case. Juntao also sensed the strangeness of this matter. Hearing the discussions around her, she said worriedly, "This is too much of a coincidence. Everyone can see the problem." Cain Yang said nothing with a smile. She thought that her master must have calculated everything before he came to the Guecheng temple. How could anyone predict his chess skills better than his? Sensei glanced at her. She wanted to pull Jun Tao away from her, but thinking of the recent rumor in the cultivation circle, she asked curiously, "I heard that you have taken him as your master?" "Yes," Cain Yang said with a smile. Sensei suddenly felt that Cain Yang was much more pleasing to the eye. She asked Cain Yang and Jun Tao, "Do you know the 12th priest?" Cain Yang and Jun Tao shook their heads. "My mother told me that he was a formidable figure, very ambitious and murderous. He had many supporters in the underworld, but he had never come to the surface of the earth." Sensei arched her eyebrows and continued contentedly. "Such a figure came to the surface of the earth, but died before he could cause any trouble. It's because the Aoyama sect had prepared for this." Jun Tao asked worriedly, "How will the Aoyama sect explain this matter?" Sensei said, "Killing the 12th priest is a great contribution to the human race. What's there to explain? It was said that it was the golden autumn season, but the autumn on the cold mountain was white because of the white frosted grass and the early snowfall. The cold wind traveled through the fields, harvesting all the green plants and freezing all the clear water. Only the warm wind brought by the lava from the cracks in the ground could soften the ground, but it couldn't change the white color of the earth. In this white world, the red color was so conspicuous that it could be seen even if one looked down from the sky. It was a short man, wearing a red robe, lying on the desolate field. This was the common dress of the priests of the underworld, which was different from the colorful dress of the royal family. With his body as the center, innumerable deep cracks extended to the surrounding fields and mountains, with no end in sight. The lava gushed out from the cracks in the distance, and a large part of the nearby cliff had collapsed. The smoke and dust had settled down and covered the ground evenly, indicating that an intense and high-level fight had taken place here. There was an extremely strange and powerful aura in the short man's body. At this moment, it was also gradually drifting towards the heavens and earth through the cracks. He was the 12th priest of the underworld. He opened his eyes wide and looked at the gray sky. The strange glow in his eyes grew dimmer, and the vitality in his eyes faded away, leaving only a bewildered expression. It was until then that he still couldn't figure out what had happened. The reason he took the risk to leave the underworld and come to the surface of Chaotian through the secret passage was to find the seal of the king of the underworld. According to the Zhongzhou school, the Grand Priest and the Underworld Master were both deceived by Jingjiu, and the seal of the king of the underworld was not an Aoyama. He intended to find a fire carp in the fire source at the bottom of the cold mountain. It was said that the fire carp had a broken piece of the sun banner. Next, he would find a deviant practitioner of the human race named Suzai. He would find the traces of Taiping Jinren through this person and obtain the seal of the king of the underworld in the end. These clues were quite clear, and they seemed to be flawless. But why did he encounter the ambush of the swordsmen of the human race as soon as he left the underworld? Looking at the sky, the 12th priest suddenly felt that there seemed to be a shapeless underworld river hidden in the burning fireball, which was descending slowly. Was this the omen of death? He had cultivated diligently for 100 years and tempered his body in the underworld river for 30,000 days and nights. Was he going to return to the underworld river like this? He was truly unwilling to accept this fate, because he had many things to do. He wanted to become the Grand Priest and even the new king of the underworld. He even wanted to lead the army of the underworld to Chaotian and bring back the glory of his ancestors. Ah, was that the rumored sunlight? He squinted his eyes with difficulty, thinking that the sunlight was not as beautiful as rumored, and the sunlight was too dazzling. It was not as comfortable as the heavenly fire. At the last moment of his life, he suddenly felt remorseful for a brief moment, wondering why he and his tribesmen had to risk their lives for such a dazzling fireball. Having thought of this, the 12th priest stopped breathing and closed his eyes. His soul fire dissipated into countless glowing specks and was burned into a puff of green smoke by a sword fire, descending from the sky, nowhere to be found. Among the swordsmen of the new generation in the underworld, the 12th priest was undoubtedly the greatest threat to the human race. He was ambitious, strong-willed, far-sighted, and cruel in his methods. Most importantly, he had a lot of room for growth. This was the first time he had come to the surface of Chaotian, and it was also the last time. In fact, what he encountered was not an ambush, because the attacker was only one person. A Taoist in green clothing stood on a barren mountain a few miles away. The appearance of the Taoist in green clothing was quite ordinary, which didn't match his profound cultivation state. After ascertaining that the 12th priest was dead and his soul fire had been extinguished, the Taoist in green reached out his hand to call back his flying sword. The sky grew dark instantly, and the sun was not as dazzling as before. The flying sword was very bright, as if it had absorbed a portion of the sunlight. As the cold wind rose, the master of the windy broadsword church arrived by breaking through the air and landed on the peak top. He cupped his hands to the Taoist in green clothing and asked uncertainly, "Are you Guan Yuan Jinren?" Guan Yuan Jinren was the peak master of Shuriwa in Aoyama. He had always kept a low profile and seldom came out of the mountains. The cultivation circle didn't know how powerful he was until the Battle of the West Ocean a few years ago. Now that Fang Jingtian was behind death doors, he was the second most important figure in Aoyama in terms of strength. The master of the windy broadsword church hadn't seen Guan Yuan Jinren before, so he guessed his identity based on the bright, flying sword. The only sword that could compete with the scorching sun was the sword of the returning sun of Shuriwa Peak. Guan Yuan Jinren returned the greeting, looking as dull as usual. "I heard that a devil man of the underworld had sneaked into this place, so I came here to kill him," he said in a flat voice. The master of the windy broadsword church was a bit annoyed, thinking that this place was the cold mountain and Aoyama was far away in the south, so it would take more than a day for the fastest thoughtless sword to come here. Did he come here to kill a devil man of the underworld after knowing that there was a devil man of the underworld? How'd he kill him? Everybody knew that he must have been hiding here the entire time. But couldn't the Aoyama sect be a bit more serious and find a reason to kill him? The master of the windy broadsword church noticed that Guan Yuan Jinren's green robe was a bit damaged, and his sword wills were a bit messy, so he realized that Guan Yuan Jinren must have been severely wounded. Looking at the patch of red in the barren land, his expression changed slightly, thinking that this devil man of the underworld dared show up in his true body. Was he a disciple of the underworld master? The 12th priest of the underworld? Guan Yuan Jinren added after a pause, "It seems so." It was obvious that he had made a slip of the tongue. The master of the windy broadsword church didn't want to waste time here, heading toward the field. A moment later, he and Guan Yuan Jinren came to the side of the corpse of the 12th priest. Looking at the cracks between the field and the cliff and sensing the gloomy energy that hadn't disappeared completely, the master of the windy broadsword church was certain that this 12th priest of the underworld was very powerful, and that it would be hard for him to kill him if he came alone. Thinking of this, the master of the windy broadsword church couldn't help but feel impressed by Guan Yuan Jinren's cultivation state, and at the same time, he was baffled by Aoyama's confidence. Why did the Aoyama sect send only one person to face such a powerful devil man of the underworld? As he was thinking of this, the master of the windy broadsword church suddenly heard the cry of an eagle on a distant mountain. No, it sounded like someone was singing. The wooden expression on Guan Yuan Jinren's face had finally changed a bit, and he said with a stutter, "Young sister is drinking wine." Looking at the mountain 10 miles away, the master of the windy broadsword church thought that the peak master Nan Wang had come as well. Then he saw an isolated band of wind and snow in the distance, realizing that Aoyama's sect had prepared well. "When I passed by Shenyang years ago, I saw the chessboard mountain. So the chess tournament of the Plum Meeting in the Path to Heaven was held on this mountain. King Yang couldn't forget the amazing game between Jing Jiao and Tong Yin until now. Today, the chessboard mountain is on fire. It's really scary to watch the video. I hope everything is fine. End of this chapter. Chapter 557. That place was 100 miles away. Snowflakes rose from nothingness and danced with the wind, then disappeared in midair. It was obviously not natural. The sword justice Yuan Qijing was guarding the place in person, and Guang Yuanjinren and Nan Wang were ready to strike at any time. There might be more swordsmen hiding in the clouds over there. Given the powerful strength and confidence of the Aoyama sect, they had even arranged such a grand battle array, which meant that the matter here was not over yet, and it was still going to be very serious. "What do you need us to do?" the master of the Windy Broadsword Church asked without hesitation. It was the responsibility of the entire human race to suppress the underworld, and nobody could stay out of it. Guang Yuanjinren answered honestly, "I don't know. Since the sect master asked us to come, we came." Thinking of the young sect master of Aoyama, the master of the Windy Broadsword Church didn't know what to say. Looking at the corpse of the 12th priest, he asked, "What should we do with it? Should I bring it back to Jui City?" "No need." No sooner had Guang Yinjinren finished his words than the sunlight shone on the sword of the returning sun, burning the corpse of the 12th priest into ashes. Then he took out a piece of paper from his sleeve and read it carefully. After making sure that the time and place were correct, he cupped his hands to bid farewell and flew northwest on his sword several hundred miles away. The unpleasant singing also disappeared along with him, and the lonely snowstorm also vanished in the sky. The 12th priest of the underworld was killed by the Aoyama sect as soon as he came to the human world. This was too much of a coincidence, so it naturally gave rise to many conjectures and doubts. Sensei said that the Aoyama sect didn't need to explain, and the Aoyama sect indeed didn't need to explain to the people of the world. But some people were always special. In a meditation room in the depths of the tranquil garden, the Zen master took out the small wooden stick from his ear and blew off the earwax on the tip of the stick, saying, "I didn't expect you to follow the old path of Taiping." Jing Jiao carried the iron kettle on the table further away and said, "I've always been different from him." The young Zen master picked his ear with a serious expression and then threw the small wooden stick into the mud outside the window, saying, "Anyone can guess that you people have a connection with the underworld. Can't I?" Jing Jiao's voice was emotionless. The old dragon had transformed into the fiend prison in Zhaoga City and blocked the passage in the abyss. The Zhongzhou school had exploited a great deal of benefits from the underworld in the name of the king of the underworld. The grand priest of the underworld had projected himself in Zhaoga City and met him. He was certain of something at that moment. Zen master knew what he meant and said, "There is no evidence." Jing Jiao poured himself a cup of tea and said, "You don't have any evidence either." Zen master also poured himself a cup of tea, slowly sipping it, and said, "Good tea, but no matter who you work with in the netherworld, it is not a good thing." Jing Jiao said, "Gu Qing boiled it in the iron kettle. I think it's pretty good." Zen master shot him a glance and said, "It will take many years. Why do you decide on the position of the sect master so early?" From summer to autumn, they had read many scripts and considered many plans in this meditation room. Finally, they had found a way to repair the formation of dispersed smoke and cloud. However, as Zen master said, Jing Jiao was merely in the initial state of the broken sea, far from the upper state of the heavenly arrival state, not to mention ascending. Jing Jiao said, "After that person dies, it doesn't matter who becomes the sect master." Zen master said expressionlessly, "If Taiping could die so easily, he would have died 600 years ago, 300 years ago, and 2 years ago." Jing Jiao didn't continue this topic, saying, "Help me keep an eye on the Bai family. Don't let her contact the lower world, at least not for the next few days." "It's simple," said Zen master. "You can't defeat her," said Jing Jiao. Zen master had said this in front of Zhongzhou Zhenren and Yu Qianmin at the spring plum meeting. It seemed that he was humiliating the Zhongzhou school, but in fact, he was reminding the Aoyama sect. Half a year had passed, and Jingjiu had finally returned the same remark to Zen Master. Zen Master sighed, saying, "This is the Guocheng Temple, okay?" In the afternoon, the details of the 12th priest's death had finally been transmitted to the seashore of the East Ocean. It wasn't until then that people learned that it was Guang Yuan Jinren who had killed the 12th priest the day before. In the evening, the latest news arrived. The 7th priest of the underworld had appeared not far away from Jui City with 2 warlocks who were good at using the method of soul fire, conquering the heart. The Broadsword King was guarding White Town, far away. The swordsmen of the Windy Broadsword Church didn't have time to attack, but the 7th priest and the 2 warlocks with the strange method of soul fire died. And they died under the sword of the Aoyama sect. The night had just begun, and the stars were rising. The evening drum had stopped, and the evening classes were over. It was quiet in the Guocheng Temple. Walking among the pagoda forest, one could vaguely hear the sound of prayers and sobs coming from both sides of the official road. Nobody knew which patients were dying or which patients were dying. The 6 senses of the cultivation practitioners were very sensitive. A swordsman of the Yuanying state like Bai Zhao could even hear the sound of the waves of the East Ocean dozens of miles away if he listened attentively. However, her ocean of consciousness was turbulent at the moment, and there were countless sounds, so she had no desire to listen to the distant sounds. Arriving at the outside of the tranquil garden, she walked in after being invited by the monk Da Chang. Gu Qing was meditating and cultivating in front of the stone pagoda. It seemed that there was nothing for him to worry about anymore. Zhuai Rujui was dozing off while leaning against the side of the stone pagoda. It seemed that he had had a good dinner. Coming to the meditation room, smelling the faint aroma of the tea, and looking at Jing Jiu and Zhao Leu sitting side by side, Zhao Leu gradually calmed down. "How many more will there be?" she asked. Jing Jiu didn't answer because he didn't know how many people Tong Yin could deceive. Up until now, he still didn't understand why the priests of the underworld were so gullible, because he didn't know what the seal of the king of the underworld meant to the people of the underworld. Bai Zhao looked into his eyes and asked, "Is Big Brother down there?" Jingjiu didn't answer. Zhao Leu opened her eyes, and a faint mist withdrew from her body. "How much do you know?" she asked while looking into Zhao Leu's eyes. Bai Zhao replied, "I've only learned a little recently." Zhao Leu said, "Since you know these things, you shouldn't ask us. You should ask your mother." What she said seemed ordinary, but there was a hidden sharpness in it. It was hard to face it directly. Bai Zhao left the tranquil garden and came to the forest of pagodas, remaining silent for a long time. It was windless that night, and there was no sound of waves in the pine forest nearby. But the sound of waves grew louder and louder in her ears until it was disrupted by a few footsteps. They were Sensei, Cain Yang, and Zhen Tao. They had agreed to meet Jing Jiu. They were a bit surprised, but they walked toward the tranquil garden after exchanging some pleasantries with Bai Zhao. It was windless that night, but Bai Zhao felt the night wind was a bit chilly. The geniuses of cultivation of the younger generation were all her friends and companions, both in the cultivation tournament and in the Dao competition. They used to drink wine by the lake and make a vow that the world would be at peace. But now, Lo Huainan was dead, Tong Lu was dead, Tong Yin was missing, Hejan had become a monk, Suzai had become a wandering ghost, and Guanan Shan and other disciples of Liangwang Peak were imprisoned in the mountain, unable to come out. On the contrary, there were so many young people in the tranquil garden. She felt a bit lonely. Wait a minute. She stopped Zhen Tao, asking with her eyes if that senior master had woken up. Zhen Tao shook her head, indicating that nobody in the nunnery knew when she would wake up. No more meetings were held in the Guocheng Temple. The cultivation practitioners of various sects took advantage of this rare opportunity to ask the senior monks in the temple for some questions, or to discuss some cultivation methods with each other, or to wander around like Sensei and Jin Tao. But none of them left, because they were all waiting for the final result. News came from the north one after another. A formidable figure came from the underworld. Then he died. Here it comes again. He died again. It was the Aoyama sect who did it. On the early morning of the seventh day, the morning sunlight illuminated the wilderness. A huge Aoyama sword boat landed on the ground along with the desolate sunlight. The devil men of the underworld mostly appeared in the vicinity of the cold mountain. For some reason, none of the cultivation sects and the imperial court had sent anyone over. It was understandable that the Windy Broadsword Church, the imperial court, and some other cultivation sects didn't react, since it was obvious that the Aoyama sect and the Zhongzhou school were working together in secret, and nobody wanted to get involved. But it was strange that the Zhongzhou school didn't send anyone over. Looking at the distant Aoyama sword boat, an elder of the Windy Broadsword Church remarked sentimentally, "What does the Aoyama sect intend to do?" A bloody battle had taken place on the cold mountain last night. A priest of the underworld burned his soul fire and wounded the peak master of Bihu, Chen Yutian. As the master of the Windy Broadsword Church was about to strike, a few flying swords suddenly came down from the sky. The sword wills were so strong that the priest and his subordinates were all minced into powder. The members of the Windy Broadsword Church who had been paying close attention to the battle realized that the Aoyama sect had sent all of their swordsmen. Yuan Qijing and the other 4 peak masters and 8 elders in the Broken Sea state. This force was similar to that of the Battle of the West Ocean. After a moment of silence, the master of the Windy Broadsword Church said, "This is the only way to ensure our safety. Otherwise, even the Aoyama sect can't bear the responsibility." Everybody knew that the abnormality of the underworld had something to do with the Aoyama sect. Many people even suspected that the Aoyama sect had colluded with some forces in the underworld. After all, the incident of Taiping Jinren had happened before. If the Aoyama sect let go of a swordsman of the underworld and let a mortal die, the sect would be questioned. As such, the Aoyama sect had to act like an eagle hunting a rabbit to ensure that nothing would go wrong. The elder said while shaking his head, "It's so strange. How will the Aoyama sect explain it later?" The master of the Windy Broadsword Church said, "No matter how strange it is, nobody can say anything as long as the Aoyama sect contributes." Do you think it's so easy to kill these devil men of the underworld? Let's talk about the 2 battles we witnessed with our own eyes. If we don't invite the Broadsword King back, do you think we can keep them under control? A few days later, the cold wind blew up. The sword boat of the Aoyama sect took off with the help of the wind and returned to the south. An autumn wind rose by the seashore of the East Ocean, dropping some leaves. The cultivation practitioners gathered in the Grand Hall again. The Zhongzhou school took back the proposal they had made at the spring plum meeting. Not only that, but the share that had belonged to the Western Sea Sword School in the past was now given to the Aoyama sect. The Aoyama sect distributed half of the share to the Ozawa sect, the Platonist sect, the Mirror sect, and other sections. Unexpectedly, the No Mercy sect, who had sealed off their mountains, received the most. Since they all belonged to the Aoyama sect, it was up to Jing Jiao to divide them however he wanted. The sects bade farewell to each other. The group of the Zhongzhou school was ready to leave. It was then that the voice of Jing Jiao burst out. The Gathered Soul Valley is the passage suppressed by the Zhongzhou school. It's not good that so many devil men of the underworld have come out. Jing Jiao said to the group of the Zhongzhou school, "The Aoyama sect can be killed, but it's your problem. So don't do it again." Bai Jinren turned around and asked calmly while looking at Jing Jiao, "Is Sect Master Jing going to punish us?" Jing Jiao replied. Chapter 558. In reality, few people had seen Jing Jiao fight, and most of them had died. As such, nobody knew how cruel he was, save for a few people, such as Zhao Leiyu. Yet, everybody knew that he was a man of few words. It was rare for him to say 2 long sentences that day, but he intended to denounce the Zhongzhou school. There was an uproar in the Grand Hall, and then it became deathly quiet. Even though he was the sect master of Aoyama, the person was Bai Jinren. How could he speak to her in such a tone as if he was educating a junior? Moreover, the Zhongzhou school had come with a thunderous force, but they had to leave in silence in the end. It was humiliating enough. What else did the Aoyama sect want after having won a great victory? The reason why Jingjio said these two sentences was simple. He wanted to warn the other party. It seemed that the Aoyama sect had gained a lot this time. The rules of the Plum meeting had been upheld, and the share of the West Ocean had been obtained. The hand that the Zhongzhou school had extended to the underworld had been severely wounded. It would be extremely difficult for them to obtain resources from the underground in the future. Yet, nobody knew how much risk the Aoyama sect had taken to achieve this. It wasn't until now that Jingjio was sure if Tong Yin could come back safely. The Aoyama sect had to pay a great price for killing those priests and swordsmen of the underworld, like the crystals, magic pills, and precious cultivation time. In fact, it was the Zhongzhou school that forced them to do so. Jingjio told Bai Zhenren not to do it again. It seemed that he was referring to the passage of the Gathered Soul Valley and the invasion of the underworld, but it was actually a clear warning that the Zhongzhou school shouldn't try to shake the position of the Aoyama sect in Chaotian again. Otherwise, the Aoyama sect counterattack would be more violent and direct than this time. The atmosphere in the grand hall grew exceedingly tense. The layer of cloud and fog enshrouding Bai Zhenren was flowing and rotating slowly. Time seemed to have stopped at this moment. It was like the surface of the ocean without wind had turned into a mirror. No one knew what would happen next. If Bai Zhenren made a move, this hall would be reduced to ruins, and the Guoqing Temple might also be reduced to ruins. The East Sea, dozens of miles away, would give rise to countless stormy waves, and the people who were praying and crying on both sides of the official road would all die. Then, the cultivation world would wage an all-out war, and all the beautiful things would be destroyed, such as the small bridge, the flowing water, and the star-picking pavilion. As a result, Chaotian would return to 1,000 years ago, and the human race would be wiped out at any moment. None of this could happen. Bu Qiuxiao took 2 steps forward. Zen Master's feet had unknowingly landed on the ground. Ada hid in Zhao Leiyu's sleeve. The grand formation of the Guoqing Temple was ready to be activated at any moment. The next moment finally arrived. Bai Zhenren's reaction was beyond everyone's expectations. She looked at Jingjio and said calmly, "I have learned something." Having said that, she led the group of Zhongzhou school and left the Guoqing Temple, heading north on the cloud boat. Seeing the large boat disappearing into the horizon, the people in the temple had a complicated emotion. They felt lucky to have survived a disaster, but they also felt puzzled. This was definitely not the style of the Cloud Dream Mountain. In the last 2 years after the departure of the immortal Lu Ci, the Zhongzhou school had been very aggressive both in the imperial court and in the cultivation circle, which was why the meeting of the Guoqing Temple was held. However, the cloud boat had indeed left, and Bai Zhenren hadn't done anything, and he even said that he had learned something. A Yamatai scholar shook his head and said, "Who would have thought that such a grand meeting would end so hastily?" Shi Yun said while shaking his head, "If you knew how ruthless the Aoyama sect was on the cold mountain, you wouldn't have come to such a conclusion." That's right. The competition between the Aoyama sect and the Zhongzhou school isn't going to take place in the Guoqing Temple, but on the cold mountain, or even in the underworld. Bu Qiuxiao put the dragon tail inkstone back into his sleeve, and then walked to the opposite side, gesturing for Shiyun, Lu Shui, and other disciples not to follow him. The opposite side was the Aoyama sect. Zhao Leiyu and the others were aware that he had something to say to Jingjio, so they left him alone. Looking at the young and perfect face, Bu Qiuxiao couldn't help but feel sentimental when he recalled the conversation he had with Jingjio in Zhaoga City. He used to be the youngest person in charge of the major Orthodox sects, but he was much older than Jingjio when he was the housemaster. "I haven't congratulated you on becoming the sect master of Aoyama," said Bu Qiuxiao. "It's not a happy occasion," said Jingjio. The cultivation practitioners preferred a peaceful life without desires, but they also had to act against the natural order. It had nothing to do with power and influence no matter how one looked at it. His answer was reasonable, but how many cultivation practitioners in the world could do what he had said? Bu Qiuxiao found that Jingjio's answer was not empty talk, and he really thought so. He felt this person was extraordinary, saying, "I heard that Shui made a bamboo chair for you. He saw me make it, said Jingjiu. Bu Qiuxiao changed the topic, asking, "Who did the Aoyama sect learn how to do things?" Some words didn't need to be pointed out to be understood. Everybody could tell that the Aoyama sect must have something to do with the underworld, since they could kill so many devilmen of the underworld. "I don't want your helpers in the underworld to be the remnants of Taiping," Bu Qiuxiao continued. "If that day comes, I'll pretend that the conversation in Zhaoga City never happened." The meaning of this statement was clear enough. If the Aoyama sect couldn't get rid of the influence of Taiping Jinren, then Bu Qiuxiao would fight against the Aoyama sect, even if his reputation would be ruined. Jingjiu liked Bu Qiuxiao a lot, so he was willing to explain, saying, "I've sent a disciple of Aoyama to the underworld in advance." Bu Qiuxiao didn't expect such an answer. He was taken aback a bit, and felt a great appreciation for the young disciple of Aoyama who had entered the underworld. "I hope he can come back safe and sound," he said. The Grand Priest had a problem in his cultivation, so he had been staying behind closed doors to wash his body in the underworld river. The priests were basically without a leader. As Jingjiu had thought, those priests were worshipped by the populace every day and lived a luxurious and decadent life. Under the temptation of the seal of the king of the underworld, they were dragged into the scheme set up by Tong Yin by the underworld master before they could think it through. However, no matter how stupid those priests were, they had finally come to their senses after so many mishaps. They realized in shock and anger that this was a scheme of the human race. The thatched hut covered with golden leaves looked even more beautiful in the world of black and white, as if it was a dream. In comparison, the huge tree by the cliff's edge, which looked like an inky black ball, had a different kind of beauty. Standing under the tree, Tong Yin looked at the two armies fighting fiercely in the distant field. Over the last 600 years, the underworld has been sending resources to the Cloud Dream Mountain incessantly, so the passage must be very stable. Why didn't those priests try to use that passage? The underworld master drifted to a position as high as Jingjiu's and said, "That passage is controlled by the Grand Priest, and the Cloud Dream Mountain forbids anyone from using that passage. You should know the reason why. The formation that could transport the cultivation resources might not be able to transport the living beings. More importantly, the Zhongzhou school couldn't let others find out that they had been obtaining benefits from the underworld. At least they couldn't let others find any clear evidence. Otherwise, how could they, who had a high status in the populace's hearts as the leaders of the human race who cared about the whole world, behave themselves?" Tong Yin said, "A passage that has lasted for 600 years is hard to conceal. It's strange that I haven't found any trace of it in the great formation of the Cloud Dream Mountain." Speaking of the understanding of the great formation of the Cloud Dream Mountain, this talented young disciple of the Zhongzhou school was probably the only person who knew it well, in addition to the immortals Tan and Bai and the unicorn. After all, he had dug a tunnel under the Cloud Dream Mountain for many years. The underworld master let out an eerie smile on his translucent face as he said, "That passage is very well hidden. I haven't found it yet, so you don't have to test me. I'm just curious about these things," said Tong Yin. The underworld master suddenly reached out his hand toward the gloomy sky. A moment later, he said, "Let's stop here." Though Tong Yin couldn't see what was in his hand, he sensed a strong danger, saying, "I'll take my leave then." Pointing to the battlefield in the distance, the underworld master said, "If you leave now, I can't guarantee that I'll be able to bring you to the bottom of the well alive." Tong Yin knew that what the underworld master said was a bit exaggerated, but it was also somewhat true. Those priests found that they had been deceived by Jingjiu, and all of them went crazy. The underworld capital was surrounded by the sacrificial army of the priests, and the battles were even taking place in the sky. Those crazy and fearless soldiers of the underworld and the priests with blood-red eyes were more concerned about his life than the throne. It's impossible to break through the underworld capital. As long as you stay here, you'll be able to survive. The underworld master said while staring into Jingjiu's eyes, "It's a bit ridiculous, but I can see the shadow of my teacher in you." I believe that with your help, I'll be able to resolve the situation here as soon as possible. As far as Tong Yin was concerned, it was not difficult for him to adapt to a world of black and white like the underworld. But there was no energy of heaven and earth here. As Zhun Yuan's energy leaked out, he would grow weaker and weaker until he died. Jing Jiu said, I don't want to become a pale and feeble military counselor in a wheelchair or on a stretcher. The underworld master said with a faint smile, It doesn't matter how many years it takes. I can still play a few chess games with you. What do you need me to do? Asked Tong Yin. The underworld master said, First of all, you need to help me determine who Jing Jiu is. I don't understand what you mean, said Tong Yin. The underworld master said, I thought he couldn't be that person before, but I'm a bit hesitant now. After a moment of silence, Tong Yin asked, What on earth do you want to say? If he is that person, I won't dare cooperate with him out of fear. A few glows came out from the translucent face of the underworld master, looking eerie and exceedingly solemn, like a godly statue whose paint had been peeled off. The sound of the ocean waves at the East Ocean sounded like thunder at a close distance. It had something to do with the hard rocks by the seashore. The cliff walls of the Heavenly Well were made of the same kind of rocks, which were extremely hard and covered with moss and extremely slippery. Moreover, they had been pasted on the walls of the Heavenly Well and countless amulets and formations over a great many years. Except for some special creatures of the underground, it was impossible for anyone to climb over them. Cold Cicada turned over on Jing Jiu's palm, and then disappeared to another spot. The ocean wind in the late autumn was indeed a bit chilly. It was unclear if it was because of the chilly wind that Zen Master rubbed his smooth head, his handsome eyes full of worry. You have indeed colluded with the underworld. Let's change the word. You have indeed colluded with the underworld. Jing Jiu paid no more attention to him, heading toward the seashore. Following behind Jing Jiu, Zen Master stepped on the sharp rocks with his bare feet. It seemed that he didn't feel any pain as he yelled, Are you the underworld master? Are you the underworld master? Jing Jiu halted his steps and asked expressionlessly, Can you speak louder? Of course I can. I learned the roar of the mountain devil from my adopted father when I was young. Zen Master went on indignantly. What are you afraid of? You also know that nobody should know about this. Why did you do it then? It's too troublesome, said Jing Jiu. He might have to explain it to Yuan Qijing after he returned to Aoyama. Thinking of this, Jing Jiu felt a headache coming on. Zen Master said while staring into his eyes, The underworld master is the student of Taiping. So in the final analysis, it is you two brothers who have joined hands to create another tunnel for the Zhongzhou school. Jing Jiu said, It's a good thing. It's a pity not to do it. He was forced to do it because the situation was too good for him. It was the same as why he kicked someone. It was also because of the angle. Zen Master said, Don't forget that I was killed by your big brother. That was in my previous life, said Jing Jiu. Zen Master said, Your royal brother was also killed by him. Jing Jiu said, That's why I killed him. After a moment of silence, Zen Master said, In fact, you two brothers are not as good as Lu Ci. He looks gentle, but he is persistent. Yuan Qijing is also stronger than you two. But we are still alive, said Jing Jiu. So he didn't forgive Lu Ci. Zen Master understood what Jing Jiu meant, but he didn't say anything more. The sunlight shone on the East Ocean, giving rise to gusts of gentle wind. The wind pushed the ocean water, creating layers of waves, hitting the rocks, and breaking them into tiny snowflakes. The feeling of appreciating something depended on the mood of the person who was appreciating it. The ocean water was more fragile than the colored glass. Thinking of Lu Ci who had turned into the spring rain, such a beautiful scene could only make people feel frustrated and even angry. Standing by the cliff's edge, Jing Jiu and Zen Master gazed into the distance from the waves under their feet. What are you going to do next? I'd like to try again. He listened to the scriptures in the Guochang Temple, drew his sword in the West Ocean, and traveled around the world with the first child sword. He had already tried to lure Tai Pingzhenren out, and kill him 3 times. He almost succeeded the first 2 times, but the third time didn't cause any disturbance. If the lotus represented reincarnation, Taiping Jinren should be in the weakest state at the moment. Jing Jiu wanted to try again. I received a message from a friend today. I chatted with him for a while, but I didn't know what to say. So I copied the original message as per his request. Brother Cat, my father passed away on Monday. He came home today and wanted to ask you for a favor. What I regret most now is that before my father died, I didn't tell him something about me and let him know that he still has a grandson outside. I had planned to find a good opportunity to tell him. But now it's too late. There was no warning. Before my father died, I only gave him 2 pieces of orange. I peeled it and let him suck some water. You're the most famous netizen I know. I hope you can help me to post a Weibo post or write a few words at the end of the article. Tell everyone about my pain. If you have any secrets, tell your family as soon as possible, no matter how embarrassing it is. Don't be like me. Now, my biggest regret is that I didn't tell them. Tell all your fans and your friends. Otherwise, it'll be a pity. End of this chapter, that you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.